Good morning. We've deliberately allowed quite a lot of time to arrive here in a relaxed way, but we need to start now, else we'll be running out of time later on. Dear Minister Al-Wazir, dear Undersecretary Nimmermann, we're very happy to have you here to support us live on site. And ladies and gentlemen here in the room and also those joining us in the digital conference, we've got about 600 registrations for this sixth Sustainable Finance Summit. And we're very happy to be able to welcome so many of you personally here. Because over the last few weeks and months, I think we all have experienced how great it is to have that personal exchange possible again. So very happy to have you all. We are looking forward to this day. And you can tell we're becoming ever more numerous here, those giving words of welcome. We've entered into the partnership with Baum, and now also recently have been joined by VFU, the Sustainable Finance Professionals Network in Germany, which is great because sustainable finance is about cooperation, about developing things together. So we are increasing in number, you are increasing in number, which is a good sign. But still, looking back to our fifth summit and looking at what we know today and where we are today, to be perfectly honest, we have to say the challenges have become even larger. The relevance of our topic, especially in view of the Russian war of aggression on Ukraine and the energy crisis that we're facing, has become even more pressing. The relevance of cross-functions of sustainable financial structures has to be at the center of such a transformation movement. That's why we decided to pick this topic, and that is why today we want to discuss in very concrete terms how we can make sure that we close ranks between the financial industry and the financial industry and the real economy. This needs to be, of course, scientifically supported and substantiated, and also how can we move from talk to action eventually and finally, even if it might not be the perfect action yet. And that is what the Sustainable Finance Cluster stands for. You know, we work with different actors in the financial market here, in the German financial market, addressing questions of implementation. For example, evaluation of climate risk in a credit portfolio, or the possibilities for engagement, possibilities of an intensive dialogue with your customers. So this connection between finance industry and real economy is a very important one. And politicians, the world of politics, supported us here. The Sustainable Finance Advisory Committee of the federal government just recently organized a great conference in Leipzig, and many of you will be aware of the ambitious work program they've set themselves, and we're happy to cooperate there as well. And to see this Sustainable Finance Advisory Committee as something which is not just a service provider to the federal government, but providing its own impulse and impetus. It's this independence that allows to go into a discussion with some parties and to really point at where there are the real pain points. So, for example, gas and nuclear energy to be accepted into the taxonomy. That's a great sign, a strong sign. And we in Germany have the rather reverse discussion. Leading politicians asking themselves whether it might not be too much for the companies as to what's to be reported. Are we really up to scratch here and up to date? I'm afraid we're not, and we all need to push for that. The general prerequisite for all of us being able to do our job in the financial industry and the real economy is to provide the political framework that allows us to do this most efficiently and with a long-term effect. So I can just call upon you. Absorb everything you can today, use it in your everyday lives and work. Keep going, because we need ambition and cooperation. And with that, I'm very happy to hand over to dear Carsten Löffler, with whom I'm co-chairing the cluster. And as for me, enjoy the day and have a great day. Thank you very much, dear Christina. Again, good morning from me too, here to the auditorium of the Frankfurt School of Finance and Management. I'm so happy to see that so many of you have come here, are here personally, and I'm sure there are many participants who've joined us via the live stream. Good morning. Thanks for being here to the Minister and the Undersecretary. It's always an honor. It's always great to have you here. That also goes for this year, and I think that's a good tradition we should keep up over the next years. In terms of content, let me briefly address the topic of transformation as well, because it also has a very strong European dimension. Many of you are aware of that I am a member of the platform on Sustainable Finance of the EU Commission. That's going to reach its end now. There's just been the tender for the continuation published this week. If anybody ever thought about doing something like that, each and every one of you can do so. What's it about? There's one key aspect on transformation which I believe bears potential, also for the financial sector and helping it gain importance, and that is to look at the expansion concept for the taxonomy. There's a proposal submitted at the end of March which follows the traffic light logic, or whatever you want to call it, in the sense that there's red, dark red, yellow, we'd call it in German. In English it would be amber, and then the green. But especially for transformation, it's important to not just look at what's green, but to look at those companies and those activities that are required to move, that need to change without friction, if possible, but also without delay. And that's exactly what we are aiming at with today's event. What can be the contribution, what has to be the contribution of the financial sector? I'd like to close by quoting something I heard yesterday when I listened to the radio Deutschlandfunk. It was the press conference of the president of the Bundesbank together with the Federal Minister of Finance, and he was talking about the current economic situation. He said, in the current economic situation, we need to make more of an effort. And I would want to also apply this to transformation. And he went on to say, these factors influencing this, we can work on. No one is stopping us from it. We can only be an obstacle to ourselves by a lack of resolve and a lack of willingness to change. And I think that puts it very nicely and very concisely also for our topic here today. And with that, I'd like to start this day. Thank you. A very warm welcome also from me. My name is Henrik Olsen of the VFU, the Sustainable Finance Professional Network, a similar network like the cluster, focusing on sustainable finance. And we're here as the third party amongst the organizers. We've joined this year and we're very happy about this cooperation. We've got some overlaps with our members and our missions, and therefore it was a very apparent step to take. Maybe I can take it to another level and look at transformation from a different angle. We all know transformation essentially means moving from one normal level to another level of normal. And what's in between, that's what the innovation management literature calls a process that they refer to as the valley of death, meaning that the old world is gradually reduced, replaced, and the new world is only just emerging. In terms of technology, that means the new technologies during that first phase need a bit of a push, provided by political framework conditions, by specific investment measures and incentives, before commercialization can kick in and take it out of the valley of death towards the new normal level. And this is a process that networks like ours can accompany and support with discourse and discussion, exchanging experience and know-how. And that's, of course, where the field of science and academia comes in. Because it's about questions that also have to be substantiated from a scientific perspective, such as how to finance sustainable infrastructure required for the transition, what are the financial solutions available, what are the financial products appropriate, so that companies out of themselves can transform, and how can we evaluate the effect, the real-world impact of such financial products versus the mere portfolio impact. And those are things where we can well use scientific support in practical application. We're very happy to also have that as part of today's conference. Now, all sectors are affected by transformation, but also all segments of any organization, of the financial organization. That's the final point I'd like to make. Essentially, transformation to banks means a transformation of the business model. Because at its core, it really pertains to a change, a fundamental change of the business strategy. New data structures have to be established, risk models have to be extended, financial products have to be reclassified, investment consulting has to be extended, and all of that requires upskilling. And that too is what our organizations stand for, to address the actors within those companies and organizations and support them by the discourse we're conducting here today. And with that, I'd like to hand over to you, dear Yvonne, talking about yet another perspective. Exactly, and that's the perspective of we can do it and we will do it. But what's it actually? We need new partnerships. And Minister and the Secretary, there are lots and lots of partners for your agenda on sustainable development. I'd just like to stress that. Because for 7 years, we've known, after all, what are the targets, the goals towards which we are striving with sustainable economy, sustainable financial industry. And now we really need to cast this into partnership formats, which, as SDG 17 tells us, defines targets. And we need that between the real economy, financial industry, and society. I always see the financial industry as integral part of society. We can't distinguish those two. We're all citizens, we're all taxpayers, and we are the very last reinsurers for the risks not incorporated into the business models. So we need transformation with a maximum effect and as quickly as possible. It's the time for those who make a difference, who want to do something, and there's lots of them here. I would like to look around the room here now because I see many faces here who have already been here for the first and second summit, and I also see a great many faces who are here for the first time this year or were here for the first time last year. So, hands up please. Who was here already for the first and second summit here in Frankfurt? Just stand up. We can't do a hands up thing. It's too many people in the room. Get up, please. The first event was with the German Association for Financial Analysis and Asset Management. The second conference was held at Palmengarten, we'll remember. I hope everybody remembered, those who just stood up. Now, please, everybody stand up who attended this year and last year for the first time. Get up, please. So, what do we notice? It's a lot more varied in the dress sense, more diverse, more female, younger. Thank you very much. So, please, my very, very important request is please get to talk to each other today. The old hats and the young hats, if you want. Please do so. You old hats, please tell the young ones what your success stories were, how you fought it forward, what your experience is, how you extended your fields of activities, and how you helped promote those topics. And also talk about where you failed, because that's the know-how that we need too, in order to not fail again. So please now, dear young hats, talk about your impatience, talk about what's getting on your nerves, what really makes you very annoyed if you're further down in the hierarchy maybe, where you need the support of those who've moved up the ranks a bit and who together with you can open up new doors. And then go out there and make a change the character of this summit for today over the next 8 to 9 hours. This evening we're going to reconvene here, and I don't want to see that you only stick within your own groups. If anybody during the breaks keeps talking to the same familiar faces about how sensible the extension of reporting duties is, now stupid the taxonomy and how excessive the reporting requirements, there'll be some telling off. Today is about transformation finance. It's about solutions. It's talking about solutions, creating solutions that we urgently need. It's not about talking about existing problems, making them larger. It's about solution competence of each and every single one here in this room and also out there. And that's what we work on today. That is really my key expectation of today's summit. And with that, let me introduce our moderator for today. That's Judith Bogner, our Judith Bogner, I'm tempted to say, who's going to be our host for the second time. And if you look at her CV, you'll be most impressed. And I won't go through it because those who don't know her yet will experience themselves how absolutely into the details she is about sustainable finance, how much she's driven by finding out where the impediments are. So you're in for some acupunctural massage if you're up here on the panel. And one thing that we have in common, dear Judith, you're right that since the financial and economic crisis, you've discovered a liking for sustainable financing and economic system. And that's what we have in common, I'd say. Thank you very much for being our host. Thank you very much. And with that, I'm happy to take over. That was a great introduction. It's a hard act to follow, actually. Thank you very much to the team of the cluster of Baum EV and of the VFU. And thank you for allowing me to be a host for the second time for the Sustainable Finance Summit. And it's the sixth one, that's right. And we still need to explain why sustainable finance makes sense. Yes, it's right. With the financial crisis, the topic really got me interested and has developed inside me, so to speak. And I'm so happy to see that the community has grown, and I'm happy to contribute to this kind of boom. And I'm also happy to see so many participants here, not just in Germany. I've just been outside of Germany for 2 events, and again, I feel a strong sense of momentum there, of swell. But before we actually start into it, let me start with some housekeeping. First of all, welcome here in this room. When the room is full, we'll be 200 people here, so please be disciplined because we've got another 400 joining us online, and also native speakers. Now, for you here in this room, please, every electronic equipment, put it on mute. Mobile phones on mute, please, but keep them ready because we're going for some Slido questions later. And online, you can answer the questions in the Q&A tool, which is just below the screen, showing the stream. And don't be confused if at 10:15 a few people in the back rows are going to sneak out because they are starting their workshop already at that point. And as always, we'll be recording the summit and it will be available on YouTube afterwards. And there'll also be the same fantastic documentation as last time, which will be compiled by Baum. Another very important thing, please only attend the workshop that you booked, that you registered for. That goes to those physically here, because all of the rooms will be really full. Workshop 1 will be here in this auditorium. So if you are to leave before lunch, please pack all your things. This is not something to leave your stuff because other people might be coming in. And another thing, the room for your workshop, that's on your name tag. So make sure you hold on to it. Don't lose it. Make sure you find your room when you go into the workshops at 2:15. And I just said, I've just attended 2 sustainability events. One was more in the public sector, the other more in the development range. But in both, we could really feel the momentum, the groundswell. And that's what I really took home with me. And that also goes for investment into sustainability, and you can take it from that. Just 2 data points here to show that even in a difficult, volatile market environment, investment into sustainability has remained rather sound. Now, according to the Climate Bonds Initiative at the end of June, so half year, the worldwide cumulated volume of GSS Plus bonds, which stands for Green, Social, Sustainable, Sustainability Linked and Transition. It's a new asset class, and it stood at $3.3 billion. It's a slight decline by a bit under 30% versus a very strong first half year of the previous year, but especially for the green bonds, the minus was only 1%, although many issuers might have been somewhat scared off given the interest rate increases, capital escape from the emerging markets, and so on. Another data point, that's from the ESG assets under management, similar numbers. According to Bloomberg Intelligence, worldwide ESG assets under management this year are likely to end up at $41 billion. And the outlook towards 2025 even says 50 billion, only 3 years. And that would account for about 1/3 of all worldwide projected assets under management. And there's another thing I observed at those last 2 events on sustainability that I attended. The debate has moved on. And we heard that also in the welcoming statements, has moved on from risk screening, risk management, climate risks and so on, towards what kind of value do we want to create? How can we achieve this value and the changes that we're going to initiate, that it's a lasting one, that it has an impact? And I'm not talking impact investing here. And that takes us exactly full circle to the central term for today's event, transformation financing. And linking up to what Yvonne said in the introduction, today, in the course of our discussions, the idea is to arrive at a joint understanding of what transformation financing is, which economic activities have to be financed, how can the financial sector support it, or support it better, maybe. What are the specific framework conditions that we need? And yes, there's a debate about we need the right data, regulation, sequencing wasn't all that fortunate, but there's more online. But why, despite of all that, is it that transformation and financing in the current geopolitical world situation is so tremendously important? All of these are questions we're going to dive into today. And let me also invite you, are open. Please be open to the discussions today. Take your insights, your inspiration back to your everyday work. And what work, what business you're in, that is what we'd like to find out now. So please, phones ready. The first Slido question's coming up. We should see the code here. Right. So if you're not familiar with it, just Google Slido or scan this QR code. It's 3211317. And I hope you online are participating as well, opening up a parallel screen or a second window. First question is, what group would you say you belong to? And here's the options. Financial industry, real industry, civil society, science and academia, others. Moderator, host, journalist probably counts under others. So lots of financial sector, but I'm very pleased to see that also science and academia is quite well represented here. I mean, obviously, we're in Frankfurt, the financial location in Germany, so what else to expect? Which goes as a good confirmation for our event organizers here that the financial industry is well represented. Second is the real economy, still sliding a bit. It's about 600 after all voting here. Okay. That's a pretty good impression. Let's move on with the second question. What do you think of when you hear transformation financing? One word, please. It may be a long one. Silke Strimler was very creative in typing in a very long word here. But just type in one word. What does transformation financing mean for you? And we'll make that into a word cloud. You can see 36 people have already entered their terms, and it'll move quickly. Courage, future, right? Target conflicts, right? Taxonomy. That's where the first crucial points pop up. Change, opportunity, change, impact, sustainability. I don't see Valley of Death here yet, which is good. Path into the future. 172 have voted. It takes a while because quite a few are voting online. I'd say we'll give it another minute or so. Opportunity or chance and change. Reminds me of something often said at such events, that's the Chinese word for risk. And it consists, Dr. Sachse, what's it again? Yeah, consists of risk and chance or opportunity. That's one single word. Going where it hurts. That's very good, very creative as one term. Decarbonization, anything new? Somebody really wrote VO Death. Okay, that's my fault. 203 have entered their terms. Okay, now question number 3, which links up to this one. Where are we in terms of the concrete implementation of transformation financing in Germany? At the very beginning, first steps have been taken, but a lot has to happen yet. Maybe co-funded a regional company, maybe with KfW funds. So first steps have been done, a lot has yet to happen is number 1. Then there are beacon projects such as where I come from in Bavaria, Wunsiedel, that's a community that has completely changed over to green hydrogen power. What is transformation financing? I can't see anything happening here, and we're already on a good way. Those are the options. I think that's pretty good. First steps have been taken, but a lot has yet to happen is clearly the majority, and we can live with that. All of this, by the way, will obviously be part of the documentation, and we'll ask in the workshops whether you've learned it by heart. No, I'm kidding. I think that gives us a pretty good impression, a good start to now welcome our host here in the federal state of Hesse. That's the Minister for Economic Affairs, Industry, Housing and Transport, Tarek Al-Wazir. A warm welcome.
A very good morning to all of you, and thank you very much for this warm reception. I think it's great to see real faces again and not just tiles. And what I've also noticed is quite a few things have changed. When I look around and think about it, what it was like a few years ago, the audience would look quite different. So it was really a good thing to ask people to get up and to look. And even on a Friday, more people were wearing ties. Yes, that's what it was like, although it sounds like stories from an ancient war. And when we talk about the past, I've just checked on Google, what was it like? Pretty much 9 years ago when we made the first coalition agreement in Hesse, and I found on page 12 what I remembered. It says, and it's 9 years old, as I said, the coalition agreement of the state government of Hesse, and it says we support development towards green finance. Energy reform is a great opportunity for the financial center of Frankfurt, so banks and the stock exchange, development banks and companies, along with all those, we will find out about possibilities, how to expand and develop products like these. I remember this very well. The then Prime Minister Bouffier was grumbling, well, what's that supposed to be? But then he said, well, go ahead. And what I found quite exciting was that a journalist of a conservative paper also asked me, well, what's that supposed to be? And today, when we're looking around, not just here in the room, but quite generally, look around what people are discussing, everybody seems to be talking about it. The question how we can benefit from our financial system, let me put it this way, so that we can do what needs to be done. Because that we need to change a lot in order to bring about this transformation. And that this transformation has to happen, has something to do with the fact that this climate crisis is real. And this has something to do, and who would know better about this than we here in Germany, since February the 24th, that we're dependent on fossil energies and that we have to free ourselves from this dependence. And this includes conservation and efficiency and renewables. It includes conservation of resources and efficiency and a circular economy. So what I can say today is, yes, quite a few things have been done, but there's still a huge way ahead of us. That we need to step up the speed. This can be seen quite clearly from the fact that this country has set a target for itself to be climate neutral by 2045. And 2045 is more or less the day after tomorrow. When we think about changes in structures, and I've seen there will be a panel on buildings. Now I'm the chairman of the supervisory board of one of the 10 biggest housing companies here in Germany. And we know what it means if you have to put up capital expenditure in order to be able to reach this aim of being climate neutral, even in business, even in buildings, and even in a country that is more or less built up. We're struggling to build 400,000 new housing units a year, but at more than 80 million inhabitants, we must say Germany is more or less built up. So we need to make changes in existing buildings, and this takes money, this takes experts, and we're working on this. And I can say, well, in a way we're still at the beginning, but at the same time we've brought about the structures that will help us to go along this path successfully. At times, necessity is the mother of invention. And at times, we do manage to make changes in certain fields. We can tell by the fact that after 2.5 years of COVID pandemic, the question of whether we have more people watching on the live stream, benefiting from digitalization, and how many are here in the room, I think it's great that you're here. Exchange will only work face to face, but at the same time it's quite clear that we've been able within an extremely short period of time, due to the crisis, to make this leap in digitalization, which we'd never have done before. And then when we speak of energy, I never would have thought that on the 14th of October we have a filling level of the storage facilities for gas of 95% without more deliveries from Russia. I would never have thought that it works, but it did. And if you start earlier, it will even make even more economic sense. So I can only say you are here in the right place at the right time and are focusing on the right topics, talking about a crisis. If you think that I look a bit run down, that's due to 2 days of Transport Ministers Conference at Bremerhaven, a very easy to reach place, but beautiful. So it's quite clear we are on the way, and on this way we simply need to focus on the question how to step up the pace. I think the crisis is real and we have our targets, and now the issue simply is how to translate this into reality. Into reality not just in the so-called real economy, but also in finance. And eventually, and you know this, what we have here in the Green and Sustainable Finance Cluster Germany, we've created an entity, an institution, which focuses exactly on these issues, that is, with the real steps towards implementation. And so this is trailblazing from my point of view for the whole financial industry, and this is why the state government supports this project. The next question is, how do we gauge what we have achieved? The fact that the ISSB, the National Sustainable Standards Board, is here in Hesse is again a thing which says, where was this chapter in the coalition agreement? This was not in the chapter on energy or environment, it was in the chapter on the Frankfurt Financial Center. This was because we knew that this is a necessity but also an opportunity for the financial center of Frankfurt. At a European level, we're working with ambitious frameworks which we need to implement into reality, and of course the big issue is we need to make it even clearer what is sustainable, what is really sustainable. Banks need to know this, and banks need this for their investment decisions, and investors also need this. May they be big and institutional investors, or may they be private retail investors. So eventually we need to make sure that the coordinates in the financial system are defined in such a way that we keep on moving in the right direction. And one more thing that we need to contribute to this is better availability of data. We're also working on this. We are creating a data trustee based on GAIA-X. The Ministry of Economic Affairs is also involved in this. It's about industrial data, and usually it's not a fact that this data doesn't exist, but the data must be made available and needs to be collated, needs to be measurable, so that we will really have meaningful sustainability standards in financial reporting and also in non-financial reporting. By now, the whole thing has become so modern or even fashionable that some people tend to feel that now, well, everything is green now. It's been mentioned, taxonomy, what does it really include and what should it not include? I'm not giving away any secrets, but you couldn't imagine what the ideas are that people could have, what could be sustainable. And of course, it's quite clear as well, we need to cover sustainability risks in financial reporting standards, things like extreme weather and prediction. What does this really mean? How can all of this be covered in risk reporting? So we need specific solutions in order to benefit from the potential that we have in our current regulatory framework. We need everybody to participate. We need the public sector as an example. This is one of the things we're working on. The state of Hesse issued the first green bond, and the second one is to follow, hopefully. We're working on this, but the public sector alone cannot do it all. But it can demonstrate what can be done, and in view of the huge financial needs that we have and financing need, it's quite clear we need private capital, we need to direct it in the right direction. That's also what we'd like to tell the German federal government. Sustainable finance will not come about by itself, taking the right direction automatically. We need the right solutions for practical work. We need market expertise in order to be able to finance this necessary process. And independent actors, independent players should also contribute to maintaining this level. So let me welcome you once again to Frankfurt, to the financial center that is on the way of becoming a major place for sustainable finance. And let me remind you of one thing, an event is a success if you leave it cleverer than you have arrived, no matter whether you're attending online or physically, and you feel like coming again when the next event is taking place. And when I look at how many got up who've been here before, it worked well in the past, and I wish for this for the future as well. Have a successful meeting. Thank you very much indeed for this great warm-up, Secretary, and the journalists here in the room were listening well, I hope, and have learned that possibly another green bond is in the pipeline. Now, for the first keynote, I'm very happy to welcome Dr. Anne Luhrmann as a representative of the German federal government. First, she is a member of parliament representing the constituency of Rheingau-Taunus-Limburg. It's her third term. After some time out, she was re-elected, and she is now Minister of State for European Affairs and Climate Affairs. Welcome, Secretary of State. Please bear with us. She has sent us a video due to COVID reasons.
Ladies and gentlemen, I too would like to extend a warm welcome to you and thank you for inviting me to this event. Globally, we're confronted with a number of interconnected crises, not least of all the brutal war of aggression on Ukraine, with lots of negative impacts on worldwide wealth and also energy and food safety of numerous people. This goes to show how climate crisis and conflicts are interconnected at a global level. And the 1.5 degrees limit is something we need to continue to pursue consistently. The climate crisis is in full swing and becomes palpable in all countries of the world increasingly, be it the flood in the Aral Valley, the Pakistan flooding, the disastrous effects of Hurricane Ian in the Gulf of Mexico, or the increasing speed of the glacier meltdown, to mention but a few. Science is very clear on this. The window of opportunity is closing within which we can achieve, or rather limit, the rise in global temperature to only 1.5 degrees. The time remaining is only 8 years. Every 1/10 of a degree with which we exceed the 1.5 degree of global warming will lead to further unforeseeable and costly consequences, and those need to be avoided at all costs and by all means. In overcoming and in addressing these interconnected crises, sustainable finance takes a central role. There are two dimensions I'd like to address particularly. One, the connection to the goals of the Paris Agreement and the international dimension coming with that. And secondly, the connections between climate crisis and social problems. The financial markets, taking into account sustainability factors, are not just of a key importance for Germany as a central industrial and economic location. Climate crisis is a global phenomenon and can only be successfully addressed internationally. That is why the Paris Climate Agreement does not just contain those two goals to reduce emissions by the 1.5 degrees mentioned, or rather to 1.5 degrees, but also in section 2.1c, there is another highly relevant goal. The signatory states have committed to bring the financial sectors in harmony with those two goals. That refers to all financial flows, public, private, national, and international. To allow for a transformation of the value-added economy at the necessary speed, we, on the one hand, need really close cooperation between the financial industry and real economy, which, again, need to interconnect. On the other hand, a clear political framework setting forth ambitious political standards is absolutely indispensable. We want to listen to the companies and jointly work on solutions. If value added is checked for risks and opportunities with a long-term perspective, we all profit from it. Transparency pays out. We need to take a look at the future and move forward in an intrepid way. In Germany, at EU level and internationally, a lot has been achieved already. The foundation of the Sustainable Finance Advisory Committee in 2019 and the German Sustainable Finance Strategy passed in 2021 are important milestones we indeed can be proud of. Numerous measures promoting the individual targets or help implement them have already been implemented, are continuously developed. That goes particularly for the aim of bringing sustainable finance forward, Germany, EU, and worldwide, and that needs to be pursued with insistence. And therefore, we welcome that the federal government, as part of its presidency, put sustainable finance on the G7 agenda, with a central focus on sustainable reporting, or sustainability in financial reporting. We shouldn't cease in this ambition and need to stand for strong European standards, because only thus can we use the full potential of the public and private financial industry to the benefit of green transformation. Obviously, the government needs to set a good example in all of that. The Green and Sustainable Finance Cluster Germany, which as its members includes the organizers of this conference, is an important actor in all of this. With the EU taxonomy, we've created a framework to help move forward the ecological transformation of the industry towards more climate neutrality. And that despite of the clear statements of the German federal government against the reversal to nuclear energy. Now, all of these approaches need to be developed further. The International Sustainable Standards Board, as part of the International Financial Reporting Standards Foundation, has decided as a global standard setter to choose Frankfurt as their headquarters and started working from here in March. Which means the ISSB standards, which in the future will be the global minimum standard, the global baseline if you want, are going to be developed here in Germany. But we still need to continue to work on strengthening the global dialogue, creating and increasing awareness everywhere for sustainable financial markets and for orienting one's own standards by the Paris goals. As the EU, we need to show that we're resolved to reverting financial flows, shift the trillions for climate protection, that is. A strong, unified Europe means strong climate protection. The EU, as a signatory party to the Paris Agreement, made a submission to the World Climate Conference in November in Sharm el-Sheikh, asking to have a constant discussion of Section 21C, so financing, and have it as a permanent item on the international negotiation agenda. And that is required in order to create a platform for an exchange and negotiations between all countries, and the international implementation to be promoted by all parties to the agreement, as is the case with all other global Paris goals. However, this has not met with the undivided support of all other nations, to put it diplomatically. There are some emerging and developing nations who are concerned that we are trying to steal out of our public funding obligations. There is a trust issue at the moment that I shall return to in a minute. Also, some industrialized nations are rather hesitant when it comes to making that a separate agenda item. So, in advance of COP27, there is some convincing we still have to do. Also, sustainable foreign trade financing is the right step in the right direction. At COP26, as part of within the G7, an agreement was reached regarding the consistent implementation that is absolutely key to our credibility. The climate crisis, apart from the environmental one, also has a social justice dimension. The so-called Earth Overshoot Day in Germany already took place in May, whereas all other countries taken together took until July to spend all of the ecological resources that can be regenerated by the Earth in the course of 1 year. So our ambition clearly has to be to achieve a quick improvement here. We need to recognize that our planet has natural borders and limits when it comes to keeping our wealth and our resources. Very often those countries are most affected by climate disasters that do not belong to those who caused the climate crisis. And also, the effects very often hit the poorest of the poor. The industrialized nations, already back in 2009, committed to donating $100 billion between 20 to 25 to the developing nations for climate mitigation and adaptation purposes. According to current OECD calculations, though, this amount for 2020 was only $83.3 billion. In other words, there's a gap of $17 that we need to close as quickly as possible, without, or if you don't want to run into a credibility problem. And that will, of course, make negotiations in Egypt more difficult. Also, according to the Paris Agreement, financing for mitigation and adaptation, or reduction and adaptation, is to be balanced out. Adaptation is also an important social factor in developing nations, but that's another commitment we haven't yet been able to fulfill. Also, because private funding incentivized by public financing is very often used for the mitigation projects which promise a quicker return. And that is why at the last climate conference in Glasgow, a commitment was made to provide funding for adaptation purposes to double the level between 2019 and 2025. Now, we need to achieve that in a sustainable and lasting way. That requires an effort of all industrialized nations, but also the multilateral development banks. The Sustainable Finance Cluster in Germany really points the way when it comes to connecting the actors for sustainable financing and working towards a transformation process for a global economy that's fit for the future. I would like to thank the cluster and the organizers of today's conference for this very much indeed, because without this transformation, we'll neither be able to come up with answers to the climate crisis, nor will we be able to reach the Sustainable Development Goals by 2030. With that in mind, the topics to be discussed at the workshops and panels today are highly relevant, and I'd be very pleased if we could also bear in mind the international and the social dimension of sustainable finance in all of that, especially in view of the global crises that are interdependent. The consistent implementation of all Paris Agreement goals is absolutely essential. What's key is that by 2030, global emissions are at least cut by half, so that the 1.5-degree goal of the Paris Agreement can still be reachable, and we can bear in mind a climate resilient development across all sectors. I would like to wish you a fruitful exchange. Thank you for that introductory statement, Dr. Luhrmann. Thank you to Minister of State Dr. Luhrmann, and for the record, it was a misunderstanding. Dr. Luhrmann is obliged to be in the parliamentary session, in the plenary session. It was not due to COVID. My mistake. Now, takeaways from Dr. Luhrmann's presentation to me when looking at COP27 in Egypt is that that's going to be what I would call a reality check. COP26 built up expectations quite a bit, strong commitments were made, and it will be very interesting for the financial sector to see many countries now coming together, industrialized nations and also further developed nations, Germany, the G7, the G20, how they've acted on their commitments so far, what progress has been made, and also what the progress is in the monetary policy sector, supervisors and so on. I keep hearing taxomania. We've got 26 different taxonomies by now, including this very far-reaching European taxonomy, and that makes for a bit of a problem in the financial sector, interoperability being the key term here. Lots of talks going on, for example, at G20 level to find connections here. But we'll be hearing more of that from Dr. Sabine Mauderer, whom I'd like to welcome for our second keynote now. Since September 2018, she's a member of the board of German Bundesbank and in charge of markets and HR. She's also a member of the steering committee of the so-called NGFS, which is the Network for Greening the Financial System, which is where the supervisors and central banks cooperate, a total of 120 of them. And specifically, she's in charge of the work stream on the further development of green finance. A warm welcome to Dr. Sabine Mauderer.
Ladies and gentlemen, all of us felt the consequences of climate change this summer in Germany and in Europe. In Europe, we are experiencing probably the biggest drought in 500 years with low water levels in some of the biggest rivers of Europe. Climate change has major economic impact. Just think of the lost harvests, like now in Spain and Italy and in other places as well. Think of the disrupted supply chains because ships on the River Rhine can only carry reduced cargo, or think of the nuclear power stations that are shut down in France because there's not enough water for cooling them. At the same time, climate change is only one reason for decarbonizing our economy. The new geopolitical situation also requires pooling our resources in order to push energy reform and transformation. Now in autumn and winter, we are paying the price for our great dependence on fossil fuels. The price for gas is skyrocketing, driving up electric power prices as well. The answer in the medium to long term can only be an expansion of renewable energies. Energy reform means reliable energy. Energy reform is a central part of this sustainable transformation. The cost of renewable power generation has decreased dramatically globally. For solar power generation, for example, by 85%. Power generation from renewables has become less costly in Germany than fossil fuels. This is true both for solar power and for wind power. Within the first 6 months of this year, 14% more power has been generated from renewable sources in Germany than in the first half year of 2021. It's vital to benefit from this momentum. Only with this transformation can Europe and Germany remain competitive. For this transformation to be successful, 3 things are important. First, stable framework conditions for an innovation-friendly and investment-friendly environment. Secondly, innovation which emerges within companies and research establishments. And thirdly, enough capital in order to bring about this innovation and to scale it up. The Sustainable Finance Summit today will mainly focus on the third aspect, the issue of financing. The need for capital expenditure is great. KfW expects that additional investment of nearly 2 trillion euros will be needed until 2045 in order to be climate neutral by then. In order to mobilize this capital, both the public and the private sector need to cooperate. The public sector can enter into public-private partnerships, for example, assuming a part of the risks and mobilizing private capital. And the German Zukunftsfonds, or Future Fund, is a first step in the right direction. But in this transformation, this is not only about financing what is sustainable even today, it is about the transformation of all of the economy. So this means that even carbon-intensive industries need to be given funds for change. So we need the right mix of financing. Banks and the capital market, all of the financial sector will have to play a key role. The interest in sustainable investments and financial products has grown continuously over the last few years. So, in principle, this is a gratifying trend. However, investors often don't know whether their investments will really go into sustainable projects so that the impact they wish for will be achieved. And in order to change this, transparency is needed. This can only be done by means of comparable and consistent data and a shared understanding of what is sustainable and what is not. A lot has been done at EU level in order to tackle these challenges. As far as disclosure is concerned and sustainability reporting, the EU can take on the role of a leader and forerunner. But in order to do so, these standards should be designed in such a way that they can also be applied in other regions of the world. The degree of complexity will play a role. All in all, it's important that action has the same thrust worldwide, and I welcome it very much in this context. I welcome the work of the so-called International Sustainability Standards Boards, the ISSB, based in Frankfurt. What is just as important is the so-called transition plans of companies towards climate neutral working, the so-called net zero transition plans. With plans like these, companies can demonstrate with what specific measures they want to achieve the target of climate neutrality. Investors can then see whether they're really supporting this path towards transformation. One forerunner in this field is the United Kingdom, where stock-listed companies have to present plans like these by next year. Climate and environmental risks are also financial risks, so they are of central importance to us as central banks. We can also contribute to make sure that sustainable transformation will be successful. We can offer analytical expertise in economic and financial questions, so we can point out what the impact is of climate change and climate policy, the impact on the economy and the financial system. The Euro system has also decided to focus more on climate aspects in its monetary policy. For example, since the 1st of October, we are taking climate aspects into account in the monetary policy corporate bond portfolios. So both past and future issues of companies and the reporting on them will play a role. In this way, the Euro system is going to decarbonize its portfolio of corporate bonds step by step. As far as disclosure and climate reporting is concerned, we also want to set a good example in the Euro system. As of the first quarter 2023, the climate results of our monetary corporate bond portfolio and our non-monetary policy will be published. In addition, the Euro system will also take climate aspects into account in the collateral that has to be put up for lending from the euro system. It's these measures which will make sure that there will be more transparency in the financial markets, and in addition we also protect our own balance sheet. As banking supervisors, we also make a contribution towards a more sustainable financial system. The climate stress test carried out by ECB banking supervision has demonstrated that there is still a lot of headroom for improvement within the bank concerning the way they deal with climate risks. Climate change is a global challenge requiring global cooperation. It's more than 120 central banks and supervisors from all over the world that have joined up in the Network for Greening the Financial System, NGFS in short. So within just a very short time, this body, the NGFS, has become an important forum for the exchange of expertise and best practices. The products of the NGFS also have very practical benefit. For example, the ECB climate stress test was based on climate scenarios developed by the NGFS. We use these climate scenarios to analyze what impact missing policy decisions can have on GDP, unemployment, inflation, and other economic parameters. On top of this, the NGFS also works on market transparencies and data gaps. In our report on market transparency, we've pointed out what is needed. First of all, a classification of sustainability, a uniform understanding what is sustainable and what is not. And comparable data is needed based on uniform global disclosure standards. The report has shown that worldwide there are more than 26 classification systems for sustainable activities, so-called taxonomies, which are complex to a higher or lower degree, and they follow different methodological approaches. This shows there's still a lot to do when we speak of the uniformity of taxonomies and standards. Apart from missing standards, missing comparable data are a great obstacle for sustainable investment, and the NGFS is also working on this. We have made available a data repository, a catalogue of climate-related data sources, and it's freely accessible. This catalogue contains links to more than 700 data sources, so financial market players will find climate-related data rapidly and can use them. So you can see we, the central banks, are doing quite a lot already. So to sum up our role in one sentence, I would say central banks are catalysts for the sustainability of the financial system. Ladies and gentlemen, this transformation makes sense in ecological, economic and geopolitical terms. The question of financing is vital in this context. The public sector and the private sector need to work hand in hand. Let's all go about it and get it done. Thank you very much, Dr. Sabine Mauderer, member of the Board of Management of Deutsche Bundesbank. And of course, we're taking all of this along to our two panels. First, a panel on a more active role of the financial industry for financing transformation. We've heard a few things about this already. Close cooperation of the private sector and the government, because this financial volume will not be put up by the public sector alone. So we've put together this great panel for you with various players from these fields. Let me ask to come to the front Melanie Kerr, member of the Board of Management of KfW, Heinrich Bär, of UBS Europe, and Heinrich Sachse of the Savings Bank of Münsterland. And participating online, we have one more guest.
All right, let's continue. And this is the perfect setup now, in fact, the way you're seated. So I was saying online, we have a very warm welcome to Caroline Schenoit from Berlin, I think. A round of applause for our guest from Berlin, from the Ecological and Social Market Economy Forum, where she's managing director. Welcome to this group. And of course, I have spoken to my panelists in the run-up to this panel discussion, and from every briefing I brought a quote, something which stood out from my point of view in the briefing discussions. I'll start with the international level, with you, Mr. Baer. For 40 years you've been working for UBS, since 2018, country head in Luxembourg, and executive board member of UBS Europe. And there you're particularly responsible for wealth management in Benelux countries and Scandinavia, and asset management for UBS Europe. And importantly, since June last year, co-chair of the UBS Europe Sustainability and Climate Risk Steering Forum, which means you're wearing the sustainability hat as an executive board member. And from our preliminary discussion, I heard you say UBS is further ahead than the market. Complexity are what ties up many resources in the financial sector. I think this is a safe statement for others as well. Great to have you here from Luxembourg. Then on my right, we have Melanie Kerr. Since 2018, she's been working as a chief authorized officer, and since 21 as a member of the executive board of KfW, and importantly, responsible for IT, transaction management, and central services, which means data is very important as part of your work. And to give you some context, before you were Group Chief Information Officer at Bayern LB and in the board of Decker Bank, the supervisory board. The good news, you said in the briefing, the transformation is doable within the financial sector. We have a pioneering role as a development bank, a transformation bank. In fact, KfW is part of its mandate, but development banks can't do the job alone. On my left, we have Dr. Annegret Sachse, Deputy Board or CEO of Sparkasse Münsterland Ost, a local savings bank, sales management, organization, communication, back office, and staff function for the executive board are your responsibilities. And on the board, you are the stakeholder for sustainability, driving sustainability as part of your team. And what you said during the briefing was, as a large savings bank, it's our intention to be part of the transition in the general economy and business community, but also do some pioneering work for the smaller banks and companies. So we step ahead boldly, but we are at the starting point ourselves. And that reflects what we saw in Slido at the beginning, where many believed that the start has been made, but things, of course, have to continue. And then we have Caroline Schenoit, online since October 2020, Managing Director of FOS, which stands for the Ecological and Social Market Economy Forum. Before that, you were responsible for environmental planning and environmental technology for 15 years, both in terms of energy policy, the energy sector, but also renewables as a sector or subsector. And your main statement was that the large financing requirement for the transformation requires a clear policy framework. And when it comes to nuclear energy and gas, as sustainable in the taxonomy, runs counter to the good basic approach. That was the introduction of the panel. And now let me ask you to give us some inspirational, some content and an example, somewhere where you have seen progress and somewhere where you see a more active role in the financial sector. And Ms. Kerr, perhaps let me start with you. Could you tell us where KfW stands? Well, as KfW, sustainability is something that hasn't happened or come about out of the blue. For us, this is part and parcel of our mandate. We're a development bank, so the ecological, social environment for everybody living and working in Germany is something we intend to improve. A strong statement. When we were founded 74 years ago, this was important already. And then in 2020, we put some more flesh to the bone, so to speak. The business community and the financial sector to be supported on their path towards being climate neutral. And of course, that's some more tailwind for us, not to lose sight of sustainability and to work on that with all our energy. Quite a few years back, we established a program in terms of what sustainability means, much more than carbon emissions. So the project is called Transform, which is quite a nice and telling name. And before, when everybody stood up, I had to smile because some of our team are here and they could also help me out. And if I don't know one of the answers later on, our team is very young and also very female as well, which I'm happy about. Driving this, and there are many cornerstones. Let me single out two. That's the effectiveness management, and sector guidelines is the second one. Let me explain. Effectiveness management is to try and help us to understand what we get in return for €1 of development or support money. Where does it have the greatest impact? That's what it's about. So for our development programs, our actual effectiveness is something we want to know, not only based on a methodology, but based on real data. An effectiveness system with more than 40 KPIs was developed, not only talking about carbon emissions, but also job creation, in fact, and many other things, generating renewable energy, renewable power stations, a whole set of KPIs that we developed. The next step will then be to see to it that we get the data to measure with hindsight retroactively what the impact really was. That's an important pillar of our work. Only at the start, yes, but on quite a good track and very analytical. The sector guidelines, the second part of our sustainability policy, are to support us to steer and guide the new business towards achieving the Paris climate goals and our portfolio being tailored to it. That's not so easy. It means going without certain things and being able to say no, but also helping us not only to promote green finance, but transformation as part of our mandate, transformation of the business sector and the financial sector, making sure that our support, our development money becomes part of transactions to that end. And that's really the art of implementing our guidelines. Thank you very much for that overview. And of course, we'll come back to that, especially the impact measurement. But let me ask Dr. Sachs from the Sparkassen, the Savings Bank group, have you made progress and how with this active role of the financial sector? I think you're quite advanced, right? That's nice if that's your impression. It's only at the start, that's correct. And we are the Sparkassen Group, 290,000 being our FTEs, 361 individual savings banks or Sparkassen in Germany. So that's the group. And the savings banks will see the transformation program as the innovation investment plan of the next decades. And the transformation will only be successful if everybody is on board. That's what the Sparkassen Finanzgruppe, the Sparkassen Group, has as its clear mandate. We were established 200 years ago. Our business model is very local with a public mandate, sustainable, doing business sustainably. So that's our voluntary commitment to sustainable and climate-friendly business. And there's a goal for all savings banks to be more sustainable in a certain time frame and producing evidence that they will be until 2025. And that's beyond the regulatory requirement. So our group has recognized the challenge and set the frame. But 361 Sparkassen means that they all go their own way. We're all independently operating companies. So when it comes to our part in the group, from the region Münsterland Ost, we only really started last year. And our supervisory board made sure that the executive board deals with it and does something. And this is cutting across the different divisions in our part of the organization to transform and to implement sustainability, because we see that as a key challenge. So it has to be laid down in everything we do. So we don't do that because the regulator supervisors wants us to. And we don't believe it's just a fad, jumping on the bandwagon, using it for marketing. No, for us, it's part of the core business of a Sparkasse, a savings bank, the sustainability and viability of our business model, and also pricing investment and pricing our funding, our financing offering. So understanding that and learning as a bank with our customers to assess the viability for the future, or in short, sustainability of a transaction and a company. So we have to look at all of this involved, including all the risks. So we're stepping ahead boldly, yes, with many question marks and obstacles, the data and everything we've heard, but going that way boldly. Nobody really waited for another challenge to be dealt with in regulatory terms. But this is far ahead of and outside of regulatory. It's about the understanding of our business model, making sure it's part of our mindset, and then in everything we talk to and do with our customers. As a regional bank, when it comes to the progress we've made, it's only as far as our customers and clients are. And that's quite varied, if we're honest. So we're focusing on it because it's about the future. It's about our core business to assess sustainability and viability and the future. And we've been on this way, on this path for about 1 year now. Question: I could imagine that we also will have to find a new word which isn't so seen as so difficult, and being fit for the future is a very good way of describing sustainability, and also a good way of putting to the test established business models. It supports SMEs, small businesses, so that's great, and that's a good cue as well. And Mr. Baer, I wanted to ask you, from your point of view at UBS, you said you're more advanced than the market in this active role in financing transformation. Indeed, and before I make my real statement, let me say that I've learned one thing. Talk about being more advanced than some others. This is about learnings today. So the first lesson to me is that I'm old hat in a way, or one of the more experienced ones in positive terms, and some that may appear with a tie even on Fridays. But, well, we can be unashamed, and we are in saying that UBS is further advanced than the market. Why? Because this has been confirmed to us by relevant agencies and stakeholders. So it's not just a claim to appear bold and modern, but this has been our position for quite a few years now. Now, very briefly, a few words about sustainability and ESG in general and how we organize things at our bank. On the management team, there is a person responsible. This is a portfolio which is spearheaded by one person on the executive board, and both boards in Germany have also made this part of their key strategy in the bank. As we've also heard, there are enormous challenges, and these challenges have to be tackled. If you had asked me the same question a few months ago, the energy crisis wouldn't have been so prominent on the agenda, and I guess this is the make or break question today. leaving aside all the other economic aspects, inflation, etc. But when sticking to ESG, the energy crisis will feature prominently on everybody's agenda. Now, what are we doing in terms of the transformation? Two things come to mind, two things that have to be distinguished, and two things we're doing as UBS. Well, one thing is what we're doing as UBS, and the other thing is what we're doing for our customers. Let me explain the former, what we are doing. Of course, it's key. It plays a key role what we're doing ourselves, because it's not only our intention to offer our customers ESG compliant products, but we want to be a role model ourselves. So we are part, sometimes founding members of some of the key bodies, GFINs and others. Yes, I'll come back to that. But let me explain the customer side. We carried out a survey, one of several, to high net worth individuals, where 93% of these high net worth individuals, where it's a representative survey, not just 20 of our own customers, it's a collection of people globally, where 93% of the respondents said the way they want to invest their money is in line with their values. Now, that doesn't mean that my values means they are ESG compatible. But what we set out to do is, when you go to ubs.com, you will find our purpose at the top, which is connecting people for a better world, bringing people together to make the world a better place. So interested investors should find a platform. We're offering them a platform that will take care of their values, especially when they are sustainability, where the transformation is happening. A transformation of monies, of funds for a large number of investors and relevant investors, which is the wealthy people that are really able to invest money in this transformation coffer, if you want, but where probably there's also a big gap generally in this pool, where we have to see how we fill this gap together. And that's the path we've embarked on. Question, what I hear you say really is that from the customer perspective, you are looking after and following what they want. Has the focus changed? Have the priorities changed ever since you embarked upon this? We heard from Ms. Kerr that it's about social, not only about the E in ESG. Is social growing as well? That's a very good point, an important point. It's ESG after all. And yes, the E for environmental, where the climate comes in as well, the C word. But it's not about the climate only. It's about S, social as well, and governance, of course. So the focus today, of course, is very much on the climate. That's how it is. But of course, it's not enough. Our customers want more, which is one of the reasons. So when it comes to philanthropy, we are strongly committed, contributing ourselves, and that means coaching of customers, helping them how to contribute by their own philanthropy, where they've been wanting to do this for a while in many cases, but haven't been able to or seen the way in. So helping them along that way to make sure that impact investing is something they can contribute to or through. It's also important to say that the investor community, well, how can I put it, has expressed a strong interest in ESG and everything that goes with it. But at the same time, of course, they are expecting a return from it. So this is not only about philanthropy, spending money and feeling good about it afterwards. No, generating an impact, first of all, making a difference. And of course, being very happy to generate a return as well. Without any return, the large pools of investors are not what we're going to be able to reach out to. So they have been conditioned in a way that money has to earn more money.
Okay, Ms. Chinwit, you can hear us well. I can tell from your facial expression. So over to you. Your role, if you want, is that of providing the society perspective and also, in a way, look at the total picture, so to speak. From your point of view now, in the financial sector, and in the context of the role of the financial sector as a lever to transformation, what has happened and changed, both in the positive and negative sense, also given the regulatory framework that has been very intensely addressed ever since 2018? Well, what has happened, what has changed, I think we heard that in the introductions today, a lot has happened in general terms, putting this discussion in concrete terms, providing a basis for arguing about taxonomy in the first place that required a lot of preparational work of many parties involved. And at the same time, I'd like to thank the previous speakers for the degree of honesty they showed, because it really shows how long a way we still have to go. And at the same time, I'd like to also, again, open it up to the larger context. Secretary Al-Wazir mentioned it. We're right in the middle of feeling the first severe impact of the climate crisis. And an aspect I'd like to bring into the discussion here, we at our organization, FAS, are always very insistent on the G as part of ESG, the governance questions that can be very much determined by regulatory requirements. And as an institute or organization, you can always call for it, but that's very much the subject matter of all taxonomy discussions after all. But the actual question is one I'd like to phrase as follows. Mr. Baer said earlier, for a better world, investing for a better world. But I think the question is more dramatic than that, because there is a risk of losing the very foundations for, say, normal industry and economy to work. So existing assets, let's call them the mainstream investments, which do not fall under ESG, they also depend on all of that. It's an integrated system after all. So sustainability, as we see it, is not well, say we've got several board members here in charge of sustainability, but it is really a more encompassing interest also to secure or collateralize loans in other sectors, because we see those risks do materialize. It's not about slightly increasing risk management here or there. It's about real cost, real damage that is sustained and that in turn impacts existing business models. So my idea would be to also take that into account in all discussions. This, landslide potential that comes with it, because that may help to maybe take the next steps faster, arrive at a joint understanding faster. And we at FAS also look at the scientific substantiation, especially on green budgeting. There have recently been 2 publications which mirrors private investment and private investment organizations. And there's pretty large gaps in the definitions there as well. There's not much of a difference, or I'd rather fear that on the public side we are lagging even more behind, at least in Germany. And at that point, I'd be happy for the further discussion to also look at the question how to bring it from a niche to the mainstream. Because I believe that's absolutely urgent. It's something that should have happened yesterday, really. And at the same time, we all see and understand that there's quite an operational challenge to this. There's applause in the audience for you, Ms. Chenwit, and I think that nicely links up to where you stopped, Frauke. Ms. Kehr. Measuring, to really be able to see what actually do we achieve with the kind of changes we see. Do those capital flows make a difference or don't they? And we have to revert them elsewhere. Do you want to link up to what Ms. Chenwit just said? I think you gave great input and a great starter, so to speak. And now, to be perfectly honest, we talk a lot about sustainability and honesty, and data is always to come in helpful in that. And that's something which I, in my responsibility, of course, feel close to. It's really about implementation and why and how do data help us? Two important points were mentioned already. It's important for investors to understand that their investments do flow into sustainability, into impact, and one might want to understand better about the results and the impact and get a return for it. That's important, where we need data and comparable data, and not do it for every single investment separately. And secondly, we do set ourselves targets. We're talking about 2045, which sounds way in the distant future, but it's actually rather tomorrow than the day after tomorrow. And we really need to look at how we can measure the achievement of those goals and targets. And data help with that. We at KfW currently look at efficiency and efficacy management. What kind of data do we need? What helps us to understand the big picture? And of course, we're taking an opportunistic approach here. We would love clear standards, comparable data, the one pool that has it all and that we can just tap into. But it doesn't exist yet. And that's why we can't wait for it. There's no time left. So we simply have to look at what data do we have, what do they tell us. And I think it's fair to say the more data we collect and the more we try out, the more we experiment, the smarter we're going to get. And I'm always a friend of just taking the data we've got and get started. And if we realize afterwards that wasn't 100% reliable or 100% what we were looking for, then we can always fine tune. That's what we need to do now, and we're all required to butt in there. I like to see that there are so many different initiatives. We're talking different data pools here. Somebody said it earlier. Everybody wants to contribute. It's just about really start doing it now and not in all of that lose sight of the trade-off between necessary standards and availability that we need now. And another point important to me, we talk about KPIs a lot. Maybe it's worth thinking about how the KPIs that we do measure can be extended or expanded by ecological targets. Our national economists have come up with an interesting approach. They say we talk GDP, we need economic strength, we need economic success, but it would be nice to add another key figure to the GDP and ask for the ecological cost at which we work towards that level of wealth. That might be one small contribution which would show us we need this large data pool to achieve such extensions. Very good point, and to me that's always a bit of a pink elephant that for the GDP such an update would indeed need to be developed. In our discussion now, we are at a section which in my prep talk or preparation I called levers and hurdles. So the non-existing data pool is a hurdle, an obstacle, but the KPIs and the analyses to be developed as levers for that more active role. And another point, the Sustainable Finance Advisory Committee also set it themselves as a separate work stream or working group. Data infrastructure and digitization and reporting, measuring and analyzing, to be developed at the federal level for the entire financial sector with all of the stakeholders involved. And with that, I'd like to move over to you again, Dr. Sachse. We are already in the middle of the crisis. That was a statement earlier. And as Ms. Shinwit said, the companies already get to feel the impacts. Maybe you could go a bit more into detail how you work together with your clients here and how you approach the companies and reversely how they approach you. I'll happily do that. To us, it also comes at two levels. As Ms. Keir just said, on the one hand, we need to look at our credit portfolio as a whole and understand, at the moment there's a main focus on CO2, what is the CO2 emission of our portfolio at the moment? What do we finance with our portfolio? And how can we generate a path, a reduction path, so that by 2045 we are matching the federal government's target, which for us as a public bank is absolutely indispensable. And we're at the very start here. We're at the Münsterland Ost organization, and as Sparkassen and as savings banks, we don't have a system yet. To get closer to this via data, via industry data, whatever, in order to get a feeling for what actually is contained in our credit portfolio in terms of CO2 impact, to actually be able to identify a reduction path. And doing that at the large level with all of the uncertainties and all of the risks that come with it, but using industry data on an aggregated level in order to at least get started. I personally, for our region, don't want to wait for decisions to be taken at group level. We've got to start somewhere and can fine-tune when data get better and more reliable. That's the aggregate level. At the individual client level, as Ms. Shinwei just said, that's the very question. The risks are already apparent and striking. And we are very close to our customers and clients, and it's just as striking for us, therefore. So in every single client discussion and talk and meeting, we've got to address this from a qualitative point of view. For your company, what's the climate impact? That's an indication for transitory risks. What's the climate dependence of your company? That's an indication for physical risk. And what is your adaptation capacity to climate change? And talking about that in qualitative terms with the customers in any meeting, that's where we're still at the very outset. There are some companies who can answer such questions, but there are many small and very small companies who simply haven't yet looked at that question. And that's also our internal challenge at the moment. We've got client advisors out there who are well informed and who've got the know-how they need for sustainability. They do dare go out into the market and ask those questions. But obviously, we also have some inhibitions. There are companies who've taken it a step further and they tell you to go back and learn which questions to ask first. So we've got to be honest. First of all, we need to upskill internally. Then we meet with ignorance on the one hand and absolute experts on the other. And we're right in the midst of that, learning to gather the data on a qualitative level in order to then address them on a quantitative one. And to really get a handle on it, to be able to rely on valid data in order to define reduction paths in the first place. Ms. Shinwei, do you think you've been heard? Certainly, in parts, yes. And maybe I can immediately react to this. I think it's very apparent that its capacities across the range, both for customers, clients, and advisors, where there is simply a need for qualification and upskilling. That's also what our analysis of the public sector confirmed. And I know that the Sustainable Finance Advisory Committee has made proposals for platforms and similar things. And again, my appeal would be, one doesn't have to wait for institutionalization necessarily, although I would very much be in favor of it, but there is also the regional network potential in the Münsterland, as you just said. You've got a Lord Mayor who, for the public sector, has already identified green budgeting as a key thing. So looking at one's own network, at one's own immediate area of influence, if you reach out there, you'll probably be able to identify synergy potential, which when you start out and despair in view of the complexity, you might not have necessarily identified. And you can hear it from what I'm saying, and I also heard that from what you said. It's the general consensus. Public and private investments have to come together and take effect together, and therefore very specifically look for an exchange of those two sectors. It goes down to the local, the municipal level, and again, the gaps are equally large. The methods may differ, but the impact will have to be the same. So in terms of methodology development, I think there are very good points to start from, and also how to avoid to, go about it in a non-synchronized way. Very good. And at this point, I would like to open it to the floor, maybe. There are 4 handheld microphones that can be taken around. And if there's questions amongst you listening in the stream, there's a line below the stream window or at the bottom of the screen where you can enter questions, which we will see on the screen here. I can't see anybody raising their hand right now. Oh, there is. Ms. Stremlau, if I've identified you correctly. Can we have a microphone for Ms. Stremlau, please? So we can all hear what she says. And there's also microphones on the other side of the audience. Thank you. I have a question for Ms. Sachse. I found it wonderfully honest the way you're describing the situation. That's also pretty much our perception for savings banks and other banks at the moment. Now, there are 360 savings banks. What does your national association, DSGV, do at the moment? Because it's a question for all 360 of you. You need support in that. You can't do that as a separate single bank. You're getting started, you said. That's better than waiting out. Yes, I agree. But I think it is really asking a lot. And I would see your association as the one needing to provide support. The answer, yes, absolutely. And our association, the DSGV, National Association of Savings Banks in Germany, that's the inside-out view now, but they've come up with a comprehensive information, training, and systematization path. There are 3 clusters: beginner, standard, and pioneer or role model, and every savings bank is to join up there. So that makes it a focus topic for the savings bank general organization. Now, it's up to every single savings bank, though, how to make use of that. And again, it's the inside-out perspective now. In 2020, DSGV defined those levels: beginner, standard, pioneer, to be applicable by 25. Now, we at Münsterland Ost, we said we want to be in the pioneer, in the role model section, not because we believe we're so great, but I believe if in 2020 indicators were developed to be a role model by 2025, if we've got them by 25, we're anything but a role model or a pioneer, but we're somewhere in the midst of the entire movement, which is still demanding enough and maybe good enough, because we're not the GLS bank and others. We're a savings bank with a public mandate. We're also under a certain transformation obligation and differ in that from certain, say, more pioneering banks. So we are receiving a lot of support, but of course it is something which every single individual savings bank has to address separately. And Ms. Schenwit just said, the chairman of our supervisory or administrative board also has a role to play, because there is an administrative board to every local savings bank, and that's the crucial thing about decentralized organizations. There are central measures, but every bank is to implement it on its own, with their own decision-making bodies. Other savings banks are faced by other challenges at the moment. We have to be clear on that too. So to me, both things are true. We receive support, and that needs to be the strength of centralization that has to come in here. It's too big a topic, but still every savings bank on its own needs to address it too. So it's give and take, or sometimes DSGV is leading ahead, sometimes we are, and that's how we try to find our way. Question answered. Great. So let's check the screen here. Ms. Kehr, a question for you. KfW, can we see it up on here on the screen maybe? I would like to comment on this actually. I was given the microphone. I'm Ellen Weiland of the East German Association of Savings Banks. Ms. Strimlau, thank you for asking. I'm not representing DSGV here, but I can assure you that finally we've got a transformation financing project at top level, which has been ongoing for half a year now, which includes the savings banks and our partners, where we look at that in very specific terms. The first advisor guidelines should have arrived at the local savings banks, but what you said is absolutely correct. Every bank, every savings bank decides for themselves what to make and to what extent to use those central documents. And I also admit that we started way too late about this topic, but at least something's been done on a central level. Okay, good news, says the moderator. Let's continue with the questions on the screen here. This one reads, KfW as a development has lots of experience with ESG data, measuring effect, ESG risks, and so on. From that, can you derive lessons, insights, lessons learned for the financial industry outside of development financing? Now, that's a very comprehensive and powerful question. Let me answer it like this. We can't start in theory alone. We've got to look at what data have we got and how to get started, which is what we do. We looked at KfW group level, what data is available. With individual financing, we've got a lot more know-how than we would necessarily have in the large-scale programs one-on-one when it comes to the effect of one single financing transaction. So we looked at that, but it's still important to think about taking it bottom up on the one hand, see what I've got and what I use it for, and also seeing it from the top down side, because Usually we have commitments of 70 to 80 billion per year. And if we go about it individualized, saying something here, something there, then what does that say for our overall business model? So that's the tricky thing we have to address here. On the one hand, we use the data we've got to get a better understanding, but on the other hand, we also need to take the view from above, so to speak, the bird's eye view, and not get lost in too small details. And we're right in the midst of that. I would like to open it further and include you again, Mr. Beer, because you have got the European, the international perspective as well. So how about, let me say, the understanding, to put it like that, of the regulatory requirements, which may come in a somewhat unfortunate sequence? How about it in your case?
Well, you're right. But question is about resources as well, and also some complaints from GFENS. We got some pension funds that left. Okay, then the challenge for us is a wider one with the whole data sets and the whole regulatory set, because we are a global bank, not only operating in Germany or in Switzerland alone. So the data sets have to be different for every jurisdiction. And of course, that makes not only our lives more difficult, but when life is difficult for us, it's also difficult for our customers. Clearly so. So it's always the customers that suffer with us. So what is called for? What do we have to supply and deliver? And what do our customers have to supply? That's the key question. What it boils down to is simple, and we've heard that repeatedly. It has to be based on standards. We clearly need global standards, global data sets that are agreed. Everything else, well, things are happening bottom up, but the world has to close ranks somehow and agree on something. As was said before, we need a European set of rules for this. I would agree with that, but on the other hand, we need not only European but a global system. Otherwise, companies with an international footprint such as ours would see a lot of their resources tied up in this. And when that happens, that always comes at a cost. And that's cost where we'd like to invest the money in sustainability rather, in transformation. So that involves a lot of work. And of course, we're not only calling for this, but also contributing, because we have built our own data sets, and we also supply the templates to our customers based on the data and the information we have. And of course, we also want to go together with the entire industry to make sure that we're all moving in the same direction. But it means there's a lot to do with the big financial impact, because reducing the cost for all of us means that we can use the money for more sustainability and transformation. All right, then that ties in perfectly with my next question that I saw on the screen. What could we learn in Germany from other countries? What would be the lessons for us to make sure that the infrastructure and the regulatory environment could be improved as a lever for all of this? And specifically, what about banking regulation in Switzerland? Is it more conducive to ESG investors than for Germany, for example? And in the UK, you have green finance, very innovative framework. Thank you for that question. All financial centers find it difficult, quite tough going, actually. But there are some financial centers that are moving faster than, for example, Germany. You mentioned the UK. Among other things, in the UK, there is support for the financial sector, and that's very targeted support in favor of sustainability. When it comes to Switzerland, let me say this. We're not really famous for being fast, and you can actually hear this when I'm in the way I'm speaking, I guess. We have a federal system with the different levels and bodies of government and some initiatives I'll spare you the details, but everything takes time to go through the whole system. But things are happening with respect to sustainability. Things are happening in Switzerland as well. There's a very collaborative dialogue between industry, or the financial industry, and government, and the real economy. So an exchange is happening, and all stakeholders are doing their best to formulate regulation in such a way that it's supportive as well. You might be asking about the difference between Switzerland and Europe. Well, there is a difference. With all due respect, let me say that there is quite a broad approach from the start, which is quite demanding for all market participants. And France went about it differently, moved faster, and the Netherlands, that's right, taking a more pragmatic approach and not wanting to have a perfect system to start with, but moving fast versus giving everybody time 2 or even 3 more years. Now, don't mean to criticize anybody, but simply contribute our perspective. And I would say, yes, that is something where we could learn by looking elsewhere in the world. Talking about the world and the global map, we could call it the business or economic map in the world, comparing Europe and other regions of the world. In the US, under the former presidency, nothing was happening, but they are catching up fast. And then, of course, you have Asia, a huge space, where it's probably highly interesting to see what's happening there. Many may still be behind, also compared to Europe. Still, there might be or will be certain markets or regions in Asia with very good and interesting approaches that we could learn from. Since you mentioned Asia, I heard that dynamic materiality is an approach there. And in Europe, it's the dual materiality approach. And in the US, there's some resistance even for a single approach. But Ms. Chenoid, for example, and echoing what Mr. Baer said, the different levels of government that we have in Germany as well, where could we do things better for sustainability? Well, actually, I'd like to start one step before that, take a step back, as it were, and look at the challenges that different regulatory frameworks and different target markets mean for a company with an international footprint and outlook. I think it's obvious that this is challenging and can be counterproductive. So I would like to add a plea, and that is leave the no-brainers in place as far as the rest of the business is concerned. And I'll give you a bit of a snapshot. The energy crisis was mentioned, and as a consequence, alternative suppliers, energies, and countries are increasingly in the focus and have a huge market incentive. Also incentives for new extractive industries policy activities, oil and gas. And that's a very strong pull factor because prices are so extreme. So approximately, and these are numbers that The Guardian published, just under $400 million per day are invested in new extractive industries projects. And the new projects alone account for that, not the existing oil and gas fields. By the year 2030, if everything is implemented as planned, and of course there are always financing entities involved, they don't finance everything from their own equity, so the entire residual emissions budget by 2040 that we have will have been issued by that time. There are activities across the board. I don't know about your specific portfolios and whether anybody is committed there who's on the panel, but there are a number of things where it's relatively obvious that they should be stopped straight away, even though the returns might be very alluring. So yes, the the perfect is the enemy of the good. That's an approach which is often taken and can be criticized. But also taking a step back, I think, is important, and looking at the low-hanging fruit, in other words, what's easily identifiable and could be done or stopped, as the case may be, even though it may be financially very attractive. Now, taking the more global view, and coming back to your specific question about what we could learn in Germany, Ms. Borgner, well, that's really about the nitty-gritty of our federal system. We heard from Ms. Sachse what the challenge is from her perspective, and that's a challenge within one banking group alone. The decentralized approach is what it's about. Well, in that respect, let me simply point out one thing. Let's take the event last year where I saw the number, and from insurance companies or the like, I haven't seen reports yet, the North Rhine-Westphalia and Rhineland-Palatinate incidents where we can respond, the local administration, the local government entities that is, and a lot of money was channeled through in a short period of time, public money that is, for disaster relief. And perhaps that fast and efficient approach is something that I would wish in our sector and activities as well. And that was my plea during my introductory remarks as well. Here we are talking about billions every year that we are paying collectively. The long-term returns of the existing models should be under scrutiny as well, but the general economy also involves these features as well. So when it comes to the whole viability and profitability calculations, well, the reporting has progressed, has advanced quite a lot. So those doing the numbers have understood quite well what we will be up against. With established actuarial methods and modeling, I guess we would see much more clearly if we simply applied it. Well, thank you very much. I would desperately want to respond to a few points. I agree with you, first of all, in saying that we have quite a good basic understanding. We don't have a problem in that we haven't recognized what the challenge is, but in a more positive spirit, I think it's a fantastic thing to be able to say that we have a lot of innovative technologies that will help us to go carbon neutral or climate neutral. Not everything is bankable yet, and there are risks in execution as well. But now we have to think about developing these technologies to make sure we can roll them out across the board. And let me give you an example, because often the question is asked, what can we do? Data alone won't do the trick, but something will have to be done physically. So it's one example. It won't save the world and everything, but it's a case in point and also a reason for optimism. KfW launched a program, a development program in 2011, which was about offshore wind farms and financing transactions, where commercial banks at the time found it difficult, untested technologies, risks involved. It's clear that risk management has to be in place with all the regulatory aspects and entities involved and covered. So there was a risk. The technology had to be tested and developed, the understanding of risk developed, and then private sector capital mobilized. So KfW supported this to the tune of 1.8 billion euros, and the investment volume that was mobilized in the end was 9 billion. That's a wonderful example. Currently, we don't really have to take the development perspective anymore because it's a well-established technology where even commercial banks find it relatively easy to support and fund this. And those are the examples we need. Technologies of the future. Hydrogen, green hydrogen, too expensive at the moment, talked about a lot, but that's part of the levers we need if we're serious about 2025. And that's what we have to focus on right now, to make sure that we make progress and not get stuck in the energy crisis and overcoming it. Of course we have to. But that's a perfect cue for my next question. The toolkit of the financial industry. The toolkit is something that the financial sector is called upon to use. The time horizons are different. the long horizons, 2025, 30, and 40 or 45, that goes beyond the horizons that traditional banking business is used to. So, Mr. Baer and Dr. Sachs in particular, my question to you is this. What are your reflections on this? Where is innovation needed? Where do you perhaps have to change your traditional banking business? What do you mean, the risk models? Well, I mean the products that you're offering to make sure that financial instruments can be used as levers and the capital can be channeled to where it should go to have an impact. Well, I think those big capital flows are something that Mr. Baer can comment on more. No, I mean the local level as well. Okay, then the traditional bread and butter business of every savings bank, and that's an important part of the transformation. It's small, but essential, and a lot of work. The housing sector was mentioned today. 30 million apartments are older than 30 years in Germany, where a lot of transition risk is involved for every owner. And you mentioned the Netherlands, where in housing and the valuation and assessment of housing with respect to sustainability is far more advanced. When you look at the local savings bank, talking to every owner about refurbishments, 80,000 euros would be the average ticket size, 30% funded. Those are not huge capital flows, but they add up. And that's the job of a local savings bank, to contribute to a small part of the transition. When it comes to huge capital flows, our sector would only be part of the whole system. But Ms. Chenoit said that there are some easy and quick wins. That's correct. The sustainability standard and our association that was a pioneer, it's easily done and it costs a little money, but doable. And when it comes to deposits, that will help. And of course, we have to do more and be careful. But as Ms. Chenoit said, a lot can be done, converted to sustainable, quite simply. As Sparkassensektor, we're not looking for new products, really, even loans to fund refurbishment of housing, but making sure that the awareness is there. Why do I have to refurbish or modernize the apartment I own? Customers don't turn to us because a modernization loan is simply difficult because you have problems with the builders, and for 2 months the apartment will only look slightly better, and its technical factors, insulation, etc., will have been improved. And that's where we, savings banks, can do something, can contribute to the detail of the bigger picture and make a contribution towards transformation in that perspective. It's a lot of work. Well, that makes me think of the current geopolitical situation as well, and what the German government supports and the signals it sends out. When it comes to large capital flows, are the financing instruments we have enough, and the tried and tested mechanisms to really work proactively with the toolkit of the financial sector and advance the transition, Mr. Baer? Well, I think the toolkit is quite well filled even now. The tools are there. Yes, they could be used more and more often, and more is being developed in favor of the transition. Yes, that's right. Innovation is always needed. But since it's innovation, we can't say what the toolkit will be in 5 years' time, because things are being developed all the time. But the instruments that are there, the tools that are there today, I think would be sufficient in order to reinforce the current flows. The green bonds that you mentioned at the beginning and their numbers, they're funds with a specific sustainability focus. They are the exchange-traded funds devoted to this transition. When we look at the customer side, you have the institutional and retail and private clients as well that have an interest in these investments and that are happy to make this shift as well and have access. Very importantly, our opinion is that you have to think of diversifying your assets as well. not just spending everything on green bonds, spending all your savings in that, and that will solve everything. That would be quite risky too. So even within the sustainability toolkit, you have to look at the different levels and also pick the right tool and not the hammer for everything or the saw. What I also think is very important is that the investment horizon has to be long-term and future-oriented. We see 27 different subjects, and not only 26 different regulations or jurisdictions, but 27 points or areas. One key area is the health sector, with everything relating to it, including the aging population or cancer research, or making sure that obesity is reduced, not only in our part of the world, but in other parts as well, and preventive work there. Then the use of raw materials, sourcing raw materials. For example, the agricultural sector, how all of this can be operated in a more sustainable way, and this needs investments as well. And the whole digital sector is also a matter of and relevant to sustainability, because if we work with each other digitally, a lot of resource saving is possible. Space is also important. Space technology, it doesn't mean that we have to shoot at comets to change their trajectory, but things like that. So things, certain subjects as a lever for a more active role of the financial sector. Let me look around the room. Let me ask the gentleman to ask his question first, and then maybe one more comment from the digital room. Could you tell us your name?
I'm from IS-ESG, and I would like to take another look at the international level. We provide data worldwide, and we are currently seeing a new phenomenon in the US. In the past, there were investors who were into sustainability and others who didn't care. Now there are investors who are massively against it. Political movement here, the anti-ESG movement, resulting in funds that position themselves as anti-ESG funds, so the very opposite of what you're discussing on the stage there. So my question, are we on the island of those blissfully isolated, or do you see such or hear such voices again, maybe you, Mr. Beer, at an international level? Something to be borne in mind for the future? Maybe Mr. Beer first and then Ms. Kehr. It's a slightly political question, therefore tricky, and might also be driven by the midterms, but maybe one correct assessment, Mr. Beer. Thank you for that question. And let me put it like this. We at UBS, the asset under management figure was given earlier, a massive figure. I couldn't even remember it, doesn't quite fit into my mind, all of those zeros. But we have 250 billion under management, which fall under SI standards. So about 250 billion. And in total, we have about 3,000 billion assets under management, which is still quite a small share or percentage. Have we yet seen the counter trend? No. Those 250 we still see as being on the increase. But there are indeed investors who, especially in the current market situation, I mean, all of us, many of us, when we're invested somewhere, we are faced with substantial losses, book losses this year. So where would one not have run into losses? Well, energy, right. Had I bought oil and gas, had I bought, gas. But now, careful, gas is yet okay again. It's sustainable. The European Parliament's just said gas and nuclear is sustainable. Wasn't that back in July? Legal cases pending, says the moderator. Okay, let's leave it at that. Mr. Bear, okay, it is a debate anyhow, but had I bought gas, I'd be doing great. And I believe, or rather don't believe, that we are this island of the blissfully isolated. My personal statement towards customers is always like this. We can still do it the old way, the 3,000 minus the 250. Yes, we are good on that too, but I thought you had already reached a different stage of your life cycle, and that is why I made this offer to you to be amongst those 250. But again, we see it as a growing trend. We haven't yet seen such a pushback, and it's also my personal opinion. I think it is rather an opportunistic thing. Ms. Kehr, what do you make of the pushback? Answer: I think what we rather see is the conflict, the conflicting targets and goals we're all confronted with. We think of impact management, we set ourselves targets defined annually, then there's the war on Ukraine, which goes right into that, and all of a sudden energy supply and other things are at the top of the agenda all of a sudden. So if you translate targets into climate and CO2 targets, because obviously energy supply also is part of the 17 SDG targets of the United Nations. And Ms. Chinwit, I heard you very well earlier when you talked about gas, but looking at how much investment would be necessary in order to ensure climate neutrality in Germany alone, we heard a figure earlier, the figure I'm aware of, our national economists tell me 5 to 7 billion for Germany alone. So it requires a well-functioning economy for that. So that's the problem we have. We can't say CO2 only, the rest has to work as well. So that's more the conflict that we see. Moderator, I think that answers the questions. And maybe Dr. Sachse, I can ask you, do you experience any kind of pushback in your environment? Now we need to bear that in mind too? Yeah, but I wouldn't call it pushback, because pushback means you've been further and then have to step back. We still have customers, of course, who tell us, I never thought about it, sustainability. Not out of ignorance, some of them maybe, but also because the ad hoc everyday business, the needs and necessities there are so much larger. We've got to say that still, COVID, Corona, they're still suffering from the impact of that. And then we come in and say, hey, what about your sustainability effect? Then some of them do say, well, that on top of everything else. But that's something to talk about. And that's, again, talking about being fit for the future. What's your business model? What kind of risk is in your business model? Are you sure that in 15 years' time your business model is still one worth mentioning? That's how you start talking about it. It's not a pushback. It's rather still, pushing them towards it. The moderator, okay, let me try and wrap up and move over to our next Slido question. You've received a lot of input and inspiration from our three panelists here, representing the financial industry and also Ms. Chinwit. The Slido question is, how can we extend the room for action, for discretion, for a more active role of the financial industry in the transformation? So pick one of these, please. Do we need more focus on impact and effect? More focus on business opportunities? And the other options are alliances, product innovation, regulation, risk management, and other. And other to me would be education, science, models such as blended finance, or as Mr. Beer said, philanthropic approaches. And we see the Slido results moving. Ms. Kehr, what would you have picked out of these 7? I like to see its impact and effect if we're really serious about it. Dr. Sachse, your favorite? Same thing, and also business opportunities, because that's what it's also about. Ms. Kehr put it like that earlier too. Provide it with a positive spirit as well, because sustainability also bears so many opportunities, so much positive options of shaping, changing things, and I don't want to look at regulatory matters all the time. That's really tiring. Let's rather look at business opportunities and impact and effect as derived from that. That, to me, is the positive, the active thing of the sustainability debate. Mr. Beer, your favorite? I also would have gone for impact and effect. But to set a counterpoint, maybe regulation. We mentioned that too. That's quite a substantial lever effect. Now, regulation is not my favorite to pick out of these, but thinking about what impact we can have, what effect we can have, or in critical terms, what effect it is having at the moment, which is rather slowing things down. So if you could address that differently together with governments, looking ahead, looking forward a bit more. Exactly. Dynamically going about it. Let's do it. Let's get started, as Ms. Sachs and Ms. Kehr said. And positive spirit. You might have read it. Financial Times, Handelsblatt. Apple signed an agreement with Goldman Sachs that the cash bonus that you get refunded with any purchase goes automatically to an interest-bearing savings account. That's already been done by the financial subsidiary of Alibaba, Ant Financial they're called. And not just have they seen massive inflows through that, but it gave them access to millions of people who already were their customers, so they had comprehensive data about what those people bought and needed, and they could offer them the corresponding financial product. And in the meantime, liquidity-wise, that's one of the biggest funds in order to enter into the market. So that's pretty okay competition for the financial industry in Europe. And my feeling is that this is also a chance of renewal for the financial sector. A classical bank, development bank, wealth management. Because I love trusting the experienced parties with the money I saved rather than, as good as Apple products might be, an IT manufacturer. And so to me, and I would take that as the final word here, this really does mean it's a chance of innovating, of coming up with new things. And that would be a good way to further develop the role of the financial industry in transformation. Thank you very much, and a round of applause for our great panel.
Let me thank all of you, and especially Ms. Chenuit as well. Give her a big hand. She was online. And now I would like to ask our technicians to free us from all the wiring, and we'll move on to the next panel. And I would now like to turn to a very specific example of a specific application. An application of transformation financing. We've just heard a bit about it at the savings bank level. If you could move with very low noise, this would be helpful for the transmission. So the savings banks, for example, are quite aware of this need of insulating our housing better. And there are quite specific targets that have been defined in the Climate Action Act, with reduced emissions by about 2/3 by 2030 and then being climate neutral by 2040. How could this sector now be supported? How can financing of this energy and heat transition be financed? I have a few distinguished people here finding their seats. A few are still missing, but let me first of all introduce to you the moderator, the third from the left, Matthias Kopstein, and Matthias Kopp, and he's responsible for working for the WWF and has built this area, sustainable finance, and also represents his organization in many international roles, among other things in the United Net Zero Owner Alliance, and is also a member of the Sustainable Finance Committee of the German federal government. Thank you for your friendly words of introduction. Let's be specific. Let's break the targets that we've just heard about down to buildings. So you'll have to wait 15 minutes longer until you get your lunch. We won't give up any seconds of the time allotted to us. So let me just give you an outline of the topic and then introduce the panel. The idea is then that we discuss among ourselves for 2 or 3 rounds, and then throw open the floor for further discussion. What we'd like to do is mainly look at the role of the financial system concerning the issue of decarbonization, implementation of sustainability, especially on buildings and real estate. When I'm now saying I'd like to outline this topic, the status and the targets, I would like to use 8 key words here. I myself am not an architect or an engineering expert for buildings, so maybe the experts will correct me on a few things, but let's simply look at 6 or 8 keywords. First of all, the understanding of the necessity. When we speak of transformation, and that's not just a matter of climate, it's also a matter of commodities, a matter of building up more and more spaces. I'm not talking about the targets now, but a scenario, let's say we're climate neutral by 2045. That's a renewal rate of many percent each year and lots of heat pumps installed. So it'd be climate neutral then, with a lot of renewals, 1.7% from 2030 on, 2.2 million tons a year that need to be saved. More than 90% of the areas would have been renewed or rebuilt, and we have decentralized energy supply. This comes from Agua Energiewende. So this is the image we're talking about. Every building would be worked on. It will have to be anyway within the next 25 years, but here with this particular interest. Buildings are of central importance in order to attain the targets set by Germany. We've just said this. Every building, every house, every infrastructure. The current status of implementation is that the renewal rates I've just mentioned are not reached. We have just a patchwork of action. I'm being a bit provocative. The important things, the priorities are not clearly named. The targets are not being attained at the moment. 2030, in fact, we have increased emissions. Then making the market capability, data, standardization, clarity in definitions, process clarity, procedures. I'll leave it at a question mark here for the discussion. Then the implementation capacity in all fields, that's a big challenge, especially concerning technology, also on the banking side. 5th, are we prioritizing things according to necessities? When Mr. Berger and I discussed this, we said we need something like a Manhattan Project when we think of the necessity. We have conflicting targets in many cases. Financing is one area. The 70-year-old house owner living in the country, having a big house, will they really renew their building enough so it's climate neutral? So this has to do with the cooperation of players. Are we positioned in a way we should be, particularly in a large scale task like this? And then the financial system as a critical player, providing advice and financial products and financing terms and conditions. So that's just a quick outline for our discussion. And we have this super panel here. Let me just very briefly, we have one confusion here. Yes, I noticed. We can switch, Mr. Mallinckrodt. Now, first we have Miss Adam. She is managing partner of a property valuation surveyor's office. Then next, over there, you can recognize her by her color. And then Mr. Berger, managing director of developers, GWH. They have about 50,000 apartments. Then Mr. von Mallinckrodt, head of sustainability within Union Investment Real Estate. I won't give you longish CVs of all these panelists. If there's anything important they can mention it itself. Then Mr. Crestus, to my left, the only representative of politics here. He is the head of section within the Housing Ministry, responsible for construction and buildings. Exactly the right person to turn to. Then Andreas Gruber with DKB Bank. And last but not least, if I get this right, Mr. Scheller of the German Institute for Urban Studies, heading the team for financing and sustainability indicators. So we have this great panel, and I would like to ask Mr. Berger the first question. Am I right in my outline? Is it more or less correct? You have to look after 50,000 apartments. Were the necessities that I pointed out right? Or is anything missing? Well, quite a lot is missing. I'm sorry to say so, but sustainability in the housing industry requires a lot more. We took the trouble of looking at sustainability and coming up with a term which is quite tangible. We call it grandchildren capable. We want to make it ready for the grandchildren. So what our company, what's still left within 1 or 2 generations, should survive its values. So one thing is decarbonization, that's certainly needed, but there are a few others. All our buildings need to be digitalized. Connection to the internet is more important today than a fitted kitchen or a balcony. And when you look at the change in the economic situation, the digitalization of all these apartments certainly means a lot of effort. The next item then, as has been mentioned, we need to make sure that an aging society can use our buildings and is supported there. This is the great task for the next 10 to 15 years. Being ready for the grandchildren also means that the buildings can house old people, investing in elevators, investing in high-tech solutions that also provide digital support for old people. And grandchildren capable also means affordable housing. All the investment that I've just mentioned, if you add this up, it has to be financed. But the lower half of income, or the lower third, must also be able, or when you think of our grandchildren going to university, that they still find housing that is affordable. And the next thing then, on top of this decarbonization, being involved within the climate action rules. But as you notice, this is one of several items. Finally, this is also about protecting jobs. Even if I won't be in office anymore in 15 to 20 years, I would still like to give young people a chance to have jobs that are interesting and demanding. And we heard this term, valley of death. To me, this sounds a bit cynical, because if you go through the valley of death, and finally, industrial jobs and energy jobs are lost because we have backed one thing too much, then this leads to irrecoverable damage. So I want to make sure that the structures that I've just mentioned are still around in 20 to 25 years and even more. So this is our sustainability concept. Thank you very much, Mr. Berger. Great that you pointed out these perspectives, digitalization of buildings. This will be absolutely necessary for the buildings to be sustainable and energy efficient and climate neutral. Now next, Mr. von Mallinckrodt. I'd also like to turn to you as an owner, not somebody managing housing, but who owns it as a portfolio, as an investor. So when we look at commercial real estate in your case, looking at it from your perspective, well, I can agree to many things that have just been said, but I'd also like to support what the likable man from Switzerland said. We are in international investor as well, investing in 23 countries. We can't just look at Germany. We also need to look in other directions, developing other things, not just an energy passport or a building database. It needs to fit the EU frameworks. That's the one thing. And the second thing I would like to mention, what we miss is a certain claim in the financial industry. In many committees, when I go there, and this was also asked by somebody here, we're thinking we just take the rules, and I welcome the rules to have some orientation, but we're trying to get each one of our funds through all these requirements, and I'm amazed that so many funds are supposed to be sustainable, although nothing has changed. I don't know how this can be done. You mentioned another component that's not specific to real estate, something that has to do with disclosure regulations, the many requirements, but this also shows what other aspects also play a role for the financial system. Now, I wouldn't like to simply go around, but would like to turn to you, Andy, Andreas Gruber, turning away from the owner side more to the financing side. DKB, your bank, finances housing, social institutions, etc. Where are we standing from your point of view, from the point of view of your bank? When we look at the steering of investment into sustainability, well, I could make it quite easy for myself, could say there's enough money around, it shouldn't fail because of the money, but this would be a bit too simplistic for this panel. Let me put it this way, we're quite willing to do things, but we may be too weak. In order to be able to transform things as a bank, we need to know, first of all, what it's about and for who. Let me give you the example of DKB. We have 170,000 properties that we finance, quite a lot. And now you can guess how many energy passports have we got for these 170,000. Very little, maybe 3,000 to 4,000. And if you don't know who to transform really and what, how to go about it, this is exactly the thing. What's missing is our knowledge at our level, not the willingness. We have started. I'd like to thank the VFU and Hendrik Olsen and many others. We're doing this PCAF method so that we're not completely blind, but the large bulk of the property that is around, we don't know enough about them. Carsten Löffler will know this if you ask the EU Commission. Just turn to your customers. But why should the customers give me this information? They have the money already, the financing. They have no interest in it. And this is the great issue here, the big issue, that we're simply blind. I know that I don't know anything as a bank about my loan portfolio. This is the terrible thing, unfortunately. So the first thing, and it's always unfortunate to just say, well, there is this data issue, but you said, let's talk about the status quo and the barriers. This data issue, this is the very, very big building site. Well, it fits in with our topic. So I hope that something will change on data. There are many initiatives. We could also discuss the political aspects. And we could also look at what the committee said in the last term. They want a building registry as they have in the Netherlands. You know exactly about each building there. And then you would have the financing. The money is there. You just know who for and for what period of time. Thank you. We'll get to the solutions. But based on this issue of data and knowledge, Ms. Adam, the surveyors and other experts, how do you see it, the issue of knowledge and also awareness of the current situation? As far as data is concerned, this building registry that they have in the Netherlands, We also have something like this in Germany, called Master Germany, but we're not creating any standards. There are very many isolated solutions. Everybody does their own thing, thinking that they've now found the best system. There are no interfaces so that the data can be interconnected. So even if we have data, this data then, well, I wouldn't say needs to be leveraged, but it needs to be verified. Simply because we don't have a standard. We need to adapt the standard, the data, and everybody sticks to their own method, and this keeps us within a small cosmos, maybe helping us with a certain issue, but it won't resolve the overall topic. We will only resolve this if we have data which is standardized. By standard, I don't mean just low level, but something that is available in a way that is understandable and usable, and that is processed in a way so that it can be analyzed and also be appreciated. And this is not what we have at the moment. And the question I'm asking myself, and that we often had in the panel saying, well, it's all so new, well, it makes me think, why is that new? I've been in the real estate industry since 1990 for 31 years, and sustainability, this also emerged 10 to 12 years ago. And at that time it was about certification, DGNB, Green Lead, and so on. And this was discussed then. Is this real estate now worth more or less? Are tenants paying more or less? This is not a new topic. And it's a bit of a human phenomenon, isn't it? As long as we're really doing well and the market is doing well, we don't have such a need to change things or to work on this proactively. And I deplore this very much. I find it very sad. On the other hand, it also makes me think that we should now take these opportunities. Data, we need to go there now, so that we get available data, so that we can use it in valuation of properties, for example, so that we can analyze it and appreciate it. At the moment, this is only very isolated, but I need to say the surveyors aren't any cleverer than the market. And one of the most frequently asked questions was, what will happen to property values if I do one certain thing or not do it? What will happen to the values? And if you look at the national and international definitions of market value, I'm in a situation at present in which I can't say, in which I can only say, I'm not any cleverer than the market. I can only simulate it. I'll have to look at what the evidence in the market is, how many transactions are taking place, not just under sustainability conditions. We'll also have to talk about recession and stagflation and interest rates. All of this will also play a role. So at the moment, and I think we'll see this the whole fourth quarter this year, there will be a decline in the number of transactions, so even less data will be available to see where we're standing at the moment. I don't want to blame data alone and say, let's not do anything, let's just lean back until we get the data. We're observing, we're studying the market very closely, and we're very much in the middle of things, and that's one of the reasons why I'm sitting here, and in other bodies too, in order to experience, to see and smell the market, so to speak. But that's where we're standing. As you said, it's not new, we've just had this, but could you say something about your experience, especially with future-oriented issues and scenarios? Because one of the things is what the market is doing today and the prices, but we're looking at a development, as I said, with targets that need to be attained and that require quite a different form. I mean, not all of this is mapped in the markets. How do you deal with scenarios?
Well, at the moment we're using models theory-based models because we have no other ways yet. But it doesn't do any harm because the market also uses theory-based models, that is sensitivities and scenario analysis for its work. We identify parameters, especially for real estate valuation, parameters that are the most sensitive ones. Currently the interest rate, of course, but also the economic useful life of the building, which of course changes when you look at different perspectives. If you have a sustainability factor, being grandchildren enabled, you said, well, if I have to enable my piece of property for my grandchildren that are arriving tomorrow, that's too late if you have 4 little children joining you the next day. So being grandchildren enabled is quite a challenge. No, we see a huge opportunity in all of that. Seriously, an opportunity that I would urge us to use. An opportunity to use the transformation as an opportunity to really make the real estate sector grandchildren enabled. When I started, the interest rate was 10%, and now it's 3, up from 1. And of course, it's always a question of where you're coming from. From 10 down to 3, I thought, oh, it can't go down anymore, but it did, and now it has picked up again, and we pretend to be aghast, but we should be aghast at many other things. What I really like to say as a statement, okay, let's shake it off, realign, and do things better than in the past. Better than in the past 15 to 30 years. So in answering your question, scenarios, yes. My glass is always half full. I'm an inveterate optimist. But my industry, and I call it my industry because it's also my passion, should use this opportunity. It's our living space, isn't it? That's right. We're talking about buildings. So yes, it's a huge responsibility. And at the beginning of the pandemic, I was fascinated about the tenant and the people focus. What will my tenant think? And that was good, but I thought, well, it's a bit late. This is the environment which is responsible for being our sphere of living, learning, living, working, whatever. There's no more important environment, really. That's great. Okay, then, Mr. Scheller, let's perhaps look at the whole system in terms of urban design. And that's where you're the expert for. We've heard the perspective from Mr. Finn Krestas from the ministry. So what about your perspective, urban studies? Well, I don't see the holistic perspective yet from my point of view, because in my view, buildings are very much related to municipalities, the municipal sector. And know-how was actually laid off in recent years and through many years for financial reasons. 30 million apartments, Ms. Sachse mentioned in the previous panel. And typical financiers of municipal projects, especially the Sparkassen, the savings bank sector, I didn't hear a lot about the municipalities themselves. But they have to be upskilled as well and empowered to do more. The real estate sector is something they have to be enabled to support. And that also includes the collection of data. I think it's very important to make sure that municipalities also collect more data so that then it's on a larger magnitude, not just single pieces of property, that upgrading, refurbishing and modernization takes place. And not only that, that we take a more systematic view, systematic and system-based, system-wide solutions, determining the energy efficiency of buildings, first of all, across the board, then taking a strategic approach in responding to that, not just isolated case-by-case solutions. But what's needed for that is skills and recruiting skills and hiring people. Municipalities don't have enough staff. The staffing situation is quite difficult, and so it is for large areas, large parts of the building and construction industry as well. There's a real staff shortage. On the other hand, we're very much pressed for time. And quite soon, there will also be even more dire financial bottlenecks. So that is a very difficult combination of challenges. But still, we need to send out a signal of commitment in favor of building energy efficiency as one important cornerstone of this in the housing sector. But municipalities are facing quite a number of other challenges as well. Everybody's calling for more staff, but we don't have it. Energy management is something that municipalities haven't really focused on and done a lot. We're talking about owners of properties that don't really approach consultants, that don't really take an integrated view together with the development banks and the local banks. And when it comes to the building and construction industry as well, I think all of this would have to be much more integrated on the local level to be able to offer advice and better advice. I'll ask my question later. Okay, then, Mr. Van Krestas, perhaps, from your point of view, the political arena, do you share that? Do you see that when it comes to execution, for example, the Alliance for Affordable Housing and also climate-friendly building? What's your perspective from the point of view of the Ministry of Housing and Building? And after that, we'll talk about the systematic approach and financing. But did we describe the construction sites correctly from your point of view? Well, first of all, I'm impressed when I come to Frankfurt. I see Frankfurt as the financial center. On the other hand, what I also see is people are quite critical, and people don't want a land register to be completed because of data protection and privacy and because of the obligations on owners. And the panel before, which was on regulation, well, I was surprised in a way when I came here and compared to when I did my preparations on the train here. But yesterday I went to the main association of the housing industry, and there were similar statements there. My response to that, first of all, is that it's exciting. We're adapting to new things, and citizens do, and so is the government. But what's the expectation of government? We won't be able to continue along these lines. And it may appear strange that I'm saying this, but I think we have to readjust our roles a little in this exercise. And my second thought was, what are we talking about? We talk about sustainability on the one hand and climate protection on the other, one being far bigger and wider than the other. But if we want to discuss solutions, which we have to, because especially in climate protection we have extremely ambitious goals, so we have to discuss and develop paths to solutions as well. But defining the challenge first of all, and that challenge includes my ministry. Affordable housing is one challenge, the social dimension of building activities, and climate protection on the other. And that is why in the Alliance it's also described as goals, but clearly it's conflicting goals as well. And I'm still not answering your question, but now I will. What is the environment that we are acting in? We have highly ambitious goals. We have high pressure building up in a very short period of time, 44% of lowering carbon emissions in 8 years. 44% lower carbon emissions in 8 years. That is what we've achieved between 1990 and today. I guess you can finish that calculation yourselves. And still, yesterday I went to HDB. The construction industry is still working at full capacity. Of course, uncertainty in the market it faces as well. But as a consequence, the concern is whether you should expect a growth trajectory if you're a construction company. We'll remember the late 90s, I guess, and the early 90s of full throttle growth and then decline. So if we want to achieve a transformation of the buildings and achieving the 44% reduction, and we have to, then we need to ensure stability. A more stable, durable, permanent demand for this. One thing which is central in this exercise is the modernization or refurbishment. You mentioned the current percentage. I would say we need 3% at least, which means 3 times as much. And it means the people, the roles, and the people that have to install the heat pumps and apply the insulation panels to the walls, etc. If we don't have that staffing, that capacity, and very little money to work with, and inflation, we will not solve things. Prices are also soaring in the industry, so we need to strike that balance and make sure that we get what we need. I'm grateful for your comments on municipalities. Efficiency alone will not allow us to achieve that reduction by 24%. We will urgently need renewables to offset the delta in going climate neutral. It doesn't make any sense to organize every building on a standalone basis, including its heating. That's also very expensive. Of course, that would give rise to a whole new debate, but let me come back to data. I think the situation is disastrous. Establishing policies without having a clear picture. How do we determine CO2 emissions? We buy the crude oil and gas supplies and just assume that it will have been burnt. I'd be happy and support you in that view, and your leverage is stronger than ours. The government always wants data. But if the financial industry says you need statistics to do a meaningful job, that would be a very important point. During the last period of Parliament, there was also discussion about this, and finding out about the ownership structure is something that we will want to know as politicians, because it's not the building that modernizes itself, but it's the owner. And the owner needs finance. And you mentioned the 77-year-old owner, landlady. Somebody who is 75 or 80 years old will usually not find it easy to receive a loan. But it's really the single family units that account for half of the demand. 1 or 2 family housing units owned essentially by people who are quite a bit older, to put it mildly. So how can we achieve that to make sure they're able to fund the refurbishment and do it? Okay then, but it ended up in the coalition government's agreement that such a database should be achieved. The Energy Performance of Building Directive, as a European rule, says member states need a national database. And of course, we can give a boost to things and advertise things, but this has reached a stage where it's a goal, declare political goal, so what stops you? Well, perhaps it's only a perceived narrative, but the business community saying we're running into a recession now, so don't challenge me with additional rules. And I'm not talking party politics here. So from within, from the business sector, you can give a boost to this effectively. Of course, it's a part of the government coalition agreement, but this is a bargaining processes as well. And you could imagine which party argues in favor of what. Okay, then let me try to wrap this up as this panel's discussion host, focusing on this much more because it's urgent and it's urgently needed. Now, let me make sure that we don't duplicate things. Sustainability is more than only the climate, is one conclusion. And when talking about the climate in the following, it's net zero, every building upgraded and modernized is what we're talking about. And I'm not criticizing anybody. It's just in the interest of time. I'd like us to spend the next 25 minutes not on saying that it's difficult and the ambitions are high. I'd like to talk about solutions. And I would also want to skip one thing, which is what we have to currently take into account in achieving the short-term effects. And for many, it's about their survival, short-term survival. Not for structural reasons, I'd like to leave those out, but short-term solutions should not produce long-term problems, of course. So let's open up the debate and ask everybody, what do you see as the short-term risks that you have to observe to avoid long-term problems being created? Looking at a 6-year time horizon, the last 6 months, would anyone want to contribute spontaneously? And afterwards, the solutions. Perhaps I could comment on that question. I do believe that the discussion has changed over the past few months. When I talked to energy consultants, where before they kept having to explain to the owners what the payback period is, but the question now is, will there be enough gas? So the debate has changed. Is it helpful? Yes, it's helpful. Helpful in the long term as well, because it provides a different access to the subject. Now, financial viability, it might be a concept there where everybody defines that differently, but viability, financial viability over the life of the asset will certainly be a consideration. In the commercial or business sense, I guess you wouldn't be looking at 15 years ago. But if there is a risk of not getting enough gas anymore, then this whole viability discussion, including financial viability, it will be a different one. I think the biggest danger is that we're not even starting to rethink our ways, change our mindset, and push the button, so to speak, in favor of a holistic, sustainable perspective. Here I'm talking about the real estate sector and people in it, including ourselves. So that, for me, would be one of the biggest risks, not hearing even the starting gun. Okay, then. You mentioned something that I called the Manhattan Project that we need. You said the crisis logic, simply the spirit of seriousness. Would you like to comment on that a little more? And I mean solutions. And there was also a question on your point, Mr. Finn, Crestas, your roles. Which roles are needed? What level of seriousness and what prioritization? Well, it's a whole range, really. When it comes to the craft sector, builders, essentially, they should enable us to upgrade the assets to make sure we can decarbonize them. So it's electrics, but also insulation. And the heating industry, the manufacturers there as well are needed. We have far too little impetus there. Not enough people are trained, prices going up, and financial viability suffers. We need huge investment in research and development. Heat pumps as the only solutions, well, they are okay for some buildings, but it's limited use to other buildings, high-rise buildings, large buildings. We urgently need accelerated research to make sure this is put on a new level. You can see how fast we were able to create vaccines when the house was on fire. So now we need innovative solutions fast to develop new heating technologies. We need a new, completely different approval system, a new structure. 18 different stakeholders are involved right now when applying for a building permit. We have to submit applications on paper, 5 copies, to 5 entities, and not allowed to use 3 window pane insulation because it's not in line. One stakeholder would tell us, no, this goes against the listed monument regulations, and another entity would say something else. We also need reliable funding. When you have a KfW-funded project and it stopped in February, and that brings the whole project to a standstill, this week alone, 28 million euros of building contracts were simply stopped. When we turn to the builders later on, only 14 million were re-enabled. The rest will be built next year, the cost being 7% higher. So that's real life. and that stops innovation. And this is not about being grandchildren enabled. This is thinking about insurance companies as well, pension funds and others, people taking a long-term perspective, or should. But everywhere we find that goals are in conflict with each other. Here we are talking about entities and structures that developed for some logical reason at the beginning, but the way this has grown, it's not in line with even the 4 or 5 most important priorities anymore. That's why I used the Manhattan Project as a metaphor. And what we would need is really an entity that would be able to enforce things down to the municipal level to make sure that everybody is in line. And don't want to use any militaristic or burdened concepts from the past, but something along those lines, something that helps us gain traction. That was really what the economic upswing in the 60s proved, that based on less regulation, high economic efficiency in a social market economy environment was built. That's the spirit we would need again. And of course, politically, it would have to be built differently. The federalism side to things would have to be changed. It won't work. And that's how our democracy is too well established and too fragmented. What it means at the moment is what you've just said and described. The business sector, can you make a start? The business sector says, I can't. One entity has enough money, but the other entity, the other stakeholder can't use it anymore. And the interest rate burden on top of it all. So all these conflicts. And this mega goal for our society, that has to be seen through. And that can only be based when the organization of things are clearly changed. And the metaphor of a war minister, coming back to the Manhattan Project, the equivalent of a war minister is really needed in the sense of let's take it seriously. Are we taking it seriously enough? Or are we still waiting for the self-healing powers of every single stakeholder and simply hope for the best?
Would you like to respond directly? Well, I don't think, I've used the term myself, this synchronization. I wouldn't say that we should choose this, but we should bring about consensus in society about what we want to do, and this is exactly the strong suit of our society. Sustainability is so multidimensional. We tried to get this solved, but you can always find consensus about this term of sustainability, but you still include all the different conflicting targets. So we need to set some priorities. Then will we be able, even in a decentralized structures as I see it. It's funny when I say it at the federal level, I am not the federal government, but I'm saying this on behalf of the federal level. I wouldn't want the local government to disappear and to simply overrule them. But local government has to make the right decisions with the right understanding. Otherwise, we would be building a bureaucratic monster in Berlin that is trying to do the zone planning for some local areas. We have a project now on decarbonization. Each local government has to think about this. The planning at the municipal level needs to be done there. In the one place, geothermal energy may make sense. In the other, it won't be possible simply for geographical reasons. In some places, can you use industrial off-heat? In others, not. In some cases, there is a lot more wind that you can use. I didn't mean that the central government should do everything for all. Everybody else ceases to think. You need to agree on certain objectives. Yes, that's what we need, and not just at a European level, but internationally. We have a need to understand these processes and come to a common understanding. But all of this is so much disrupted by the Russian war on the Ukraine. We've had these processes, and now there is this external shock to all of this. And this is why I spoke of this discussion about what does the energy advisor really get to hear on site. You can sort of collate all of this, but we're still in an orientation phase. And it's also up to politics to bring these things together and not just to think of the conflict and the alternatives, but to try to get an added value out of it. If I may, I'd like to take you into the operating world from the political world. And the monster is already there. This is what I mean. Many small monsters. And this is the legislation and regulations and responsibilities that have not been coordinated. Let me give you a practical example. 2,500 buildings with 2,500 roofs. And on 1,800 of these roofs, we could fit solar panels. If I do this, I must not simply sell the electric energy to my tenants. You're nodding. That's a problem at federal level. The same that's happening. The building permits are given locally, and they tell you our statutes say you have to use red roof tiles, and your panels are not red. So again, a design problem, and there are many other things that I could list. Let's not do this. No, let's not do this. But this is what I mean, what needs to be synchronized. All the underlying conditions have to be adjusted and coordinated. And Germany is not able to do this at the moment, and this leads to debate. We've had the same discussions 4 years ago, talking about the same things. Nothing has changed, that's the truth. So I can only suggest to think about at larger things. Okay, we've taken this on board, let's go on half a step and go back to a bit more specific things and then throw open the floor. You said that you are using refurbishment schedules as a tool. I mean, we need to coordinate things. So maybe a schedule is a good word here. Maybe you could explain this to us, how this works and how did it worked in the past, whether it makes sense, and then we'd get to the question of new construction and working on existing buildings from a point of view of a bank, and then one or two more aspects, and then we'll throw open the floor for the discussion. It's about past, and we'll stop at 1:45 as promised. Please bear with me if I'm not answering your question directly, but let me take a closer look at opportunities. I think it's no problem getting at the data. Maybe it was missed in the past, as you said, Ms. Adam. Since 2009, we have been publishing a CSR report. We know where the problems are. The question is how to fund it and where is the return for the investor. If you really want to do this, you can certainly collate the data, no matter whether it's 23 countries or more. The question is how to harmonize this and how to get there to really derive for your own real estate and what you need to do. You mentioned that people don't really know where to go to, but there is the carbonless real estate monitor called CREM. And what's very gratifying, this has just been updated because we're so great at missing our targets. Now it's more ambitious, and it was said quite clearly, not just looking at carbon is not enough, or you could pass the buck to the energy industry and lean back. So you need to look at the kilowatt hours, and I welcome this, and I think there is a benchmark there. The benefit is it's different depending on the utilization. A great benchmark. If you want to know it, you will know where to go. The question is, how much does it cost? And this is why we have these schedules for modernization or energy renewal. And I think our portfolio is quite representative, similar to DECA or DWS or other competitors, but I can tell you, our portfolio has a lot that's in the red. If you think in risk terms, and something needs to be done. And I can't hear the 1.5 degree anymore. When I look at our own portfolio and then others, the 1.5 degrees are far off. In our prospectus, with investor information, we already speak of 2 degrees. We can't reach the 1.5. And the schedules work like this. We use vendors, and you need a good databases. Would have been a good thing to require sensors on buildings. We started in 2018, fortunately, so a lot in our portfolio has this data, or you wouldn't know what you're confronted with. I agree. You need a good database, and if you measure the data every 15 minutes at least, then you know about the load development and peaks, etc. And if things are going well, you can save between 15 and 25%, the quick wins. And with this data set up, then you can come up with modernization schedule. And what we would like to know, without the question whether it's efficient or not, we want to know how much does it cost by 2050. 2050, because we're in several countries and there are different target dates for being climate neutral, not net zero or carbon, but really climate neutral, to do our homework. This costs real money. We need to be aware of this. We also need to tell investors that it costs money. I find it a bit difficult, but I'm with you really looking at the government. We need a few guardrails, but in fact there is a lot we can do ourselves. And maybe it's just the ambition that's missing. We in our industry, in the financial industry, are trying to do as little as possible, just to focus on S&G, because it seems to be easier and doesn't cost so much. But I think the E, as important as S&G are, but the E is really what keeps us from changing things. If we don't get this resolved, the many apartments or the beehives on the roofs won't be so useful, because it doesn't solve the problems. So does it mean closing ranks or organizing things also within the players? Yes, I would be lying if I'd say it's easy for us as a company to do this. There are 2 more representatives here. I have these nice discussions, and you need a visionary. There is one or the other in the industry who advances things quite clearly. It's not so easy. But fortunately, there is tougher and tougher regulation. And I'm really talking of the Dieselgate of the financial industry from next year on. Then, when we need to publish these things, investors will see how far we got and how sustainable our products really are. I can only support this. I'd also be quite cautious with speaking of synchronization or really overruling lower levels. I'd really have to say something against this from a scientific point of view. What we need is exchange among the different stakeholders, be really serious in this, and the question how the taxonomy can really become specific and usable. Not the complete taxonomy from A to Z. This doesn't have to be our claim at first, but simply to begin with things, so that we really have something for the various areas, indicators that can be handled, that can be established so that we generate data. And I think this exchange is needed. We need status groups, we need the banks, the development banks, the real estate industry and the local governments, and if at all possible, we need something like a uniform system so that we understand things together. We need to get away from the 26 taxonomies. Local governments use SDGs, and the owners and the banks, of course, say, what taxonomy should we use now? Which one is worth more, and what are the differences? We need to think a lot about this so that we can make some progress. And above all, we need an understanding what a taxonomy really is. It's a transparency regulation which establishes what is sustainable already, not what needs to be sustainable in the future. But if you now make an offer as a company, you need to say this is a brown product, you can do transformation on this with 75% of sustainable investment. What can you do there? Now, with the building certificates, there is this labeling in the minds of banks and their account managers just do this and you have a sustainable product. And the institutional investors just look at this label of 8 or 9 without understanding what's behind it. As somebody said at the beginning, a transformation task, that's what it is, not a green label that we should discuss. And that's not always understood. Let me take up one more thing. It's not just about exchange. We need to be gauged by our results. And so let's turn to banks then. How do they steer their capital flow? And maybe you could also take up this question. For those who can't see this, there was this question that came in online concerning the comment that we heard from Andreas Gruber. How do we get at the data of the customers? The question, why are they not requested as a precondition for financing? Well, this is done now for new business, but as I said, there are 170,000 properties, and there are structural difficulties then at demanding an energy passport. Some customers may not want to give it up because the bank could take a closer look at the value then of the property. There might be a change in the value of the collateral, so this is a difficulty. Looking forward, it's certainly done, and it's a legal requirement. And we're not just partners of the real estate industry. It looks different for private house owners. It's not always required. And then there is a problem, I think, a structural problem on real estate financing. Where does it really come from? I mean, we've talked about this. A lot comes from the platform business. It comes from the Interhyps Hyperports, Dr. Klein, Check24. And this brings us to a second issue. If you want to know a lot as a bank, energy department, and so on, you have conflicting targets with sustainability, because the bank that wants to know by far the most won't be the bank that gets the deal. People will turn in elsewhere where they have to deliver much less information. And that's another difficulty. So these conflicting targets, and this brings me to your question. I could say our sustainability team has been able to persuade our board to say DKB will be climate neutral by 2040. But we won't be able to do this without buildings. If we fail on our buildings, our plan will fail by 2040. And what does this mean for a statement like this? Can I do any new construction then? Or should I only finance existing buildings then? If a new project comes at 800,000 to 900,000 and it's energy, zero energy, and on the other hand, when you look at the conversion of a portfolio, this will be quicker then. But that's not honest. I have a colleague who focuses a lot on biodiversity, and we haven't even mentioned this. What does it do with building up areas? What does it do to biodiversity? If I only look at carbon, I could say, okay, let's do large volume financing, zero energy buildings, and then we will be climate neutral as a bank. But this only looks at a fraction of things. The E is only one E in ESG. But new construction is a completely wrong focus. I think we can't really afford this anymore. There is no space anymore. D-Day is coming. So what we need to do, or the resources that we're talking about, should have to be calculated based on existing buildings, even if it means a lot of effort. I didn't say no. Just from the sustainability point of view, I've just pointed out that it can be done quickly, but your approach is much more cumbersome. And if you look at data, if you could just plug in and through an API and get everything, know where it's missing, then you could do things more rapidly in high numbers. Could write to customers, tell them, look, you need financing of this. Or we could decide that we go on for another 5 hours and throw the floor open. So I'll have to walk my talk and take a question over there. And the panelists could prepare for one final statement on behalf of the group they're representing. So what's the contribution that your group could make? Go ahead, over there. Martin Vierfer from Positive Impacts. We did a study analyzing the infrastructure sector, among other things, and looked at 13 external features, and the result was for each euro of profit in the infrastructure sector, there is a loss of 2 euros for the government or for society. But the best company from the same sector made 96 cents of profit for society because they paid more tax than they generated damage. So I can point out there are more issues than climate change. There are many other things that have big impact, and the biggest impact usually comes upstream, which has not been considered so much now. So the question is, to what extent can we move towards standardization involving the whole value chain? Because it's no use if we say, well, on this building we'll reduce carbon a bit, but we buy this carbon reduction by increasing carbon elsewhere. Well, that's certainly a correct statement. So I don't really think that everybody here would confirm your statement. Well, thanks very much for your question or your statement. Indeed, we are taking a wrong angle here. The Climate Action Act looks at the operation of the building, says 14 million ton per year, and we have a field of action of buildings with energy and construction materials of 40 million. And the efficiency, the impact, the savings that you can get, what you get out of €1 invested may be much higher. If I look at the decarbonization of cement, to give you one example, rather than 2 or 3 centimeters more of insulation on the wall. So that's just a buzzword. This could keep us busy for the rest of the day at least. But let me preempt the question you threatened with. I think the Climate Action Act needs to be developed further so that it's cross-sectoral. That's exactly your point. And we need accounting methods so that we can cover the life cycle. No, we have this. If you look at the subsidy program, it's now based on life cycle accounting. So at times we have more than we really know. And what we need to do, well, there are certain things that are prioritized and others are not so much involved. The one says it shouldn't be so complex. The other person says, well, something's missing then. So if we want standards, we need to agree on them, or we'd be moving away from each other again. We have a little lever because you only get the subsidy if you accept our standard. From a product point of view, I think it would be helpful if embodied carbon was also included. It would help us not to do so much in new construction anymore, but do something as investors in existing buildings. Okay, one last question. What could your group really contribute to accelerate things? It's not an obligation for everybody to answer, but who would like to share their thoughts on this before we close? In the housing industry, the digitalization of heating rooms and of the apartments, including the thermostat and the heating, all of this needs to be optimized in operation. It's an approach that can save 20 to 25%. It makes a lot of economic sense. We work together with the Techem company on a product like this, and this will be an approach for a solution, quite apart from classical heat pumps. I think we should work in a market-oriented way, look for markets. Innovation needs to follow efficiency ideas. And ultimately, if you are successful, this will mean much more progress than all this regulation. I saw this whole panel as a panel of regulation rage. We won't make any progress like this. What I miss is the entrepreneurial and the engineering spirit that is needed. Thank you for this appeal. Any more short contributions? Well, I think from the consultant's point of view, I can say we can contribute by pointing out again and again certain scenarios of risks and opportunities. So that more visibility is enabled, helping investors with their decisions. What I didn't feel so much was that we were all crying out for more regulation. I didn't get this impression at all, really. But what I would like to get from all of us sitting here and from the groups we're representing, I would wish that we get started, that we embark on it and do it as you've said and done. Not just saying we must, we should, we ought to, but to say really, let us do. That was a great conclusion because our friend is waiting for us. Thank you very much for this lively discussion and for the panelists. Don't walk away, but really give them a big hand. Give them a big hand. And you see how exciting it is when it becomes specific. I'd like to particularly thank Lothar Fehn-Crestes that you went to the Lion's Den. Because for the first panel, we also tried to find something having to do with government and regulation. And they're flying a bit below the radar, but we see how important this exchange is. I think, Henrik Scheller, you said this. Transformation needs to be manageable, and this requires communication among the stakeholders. Great that you were here. Thank you very much. Kudos to you. And you, all of you. So the regulation rage is being applauded. We now can take a lunch break, a bit shorter, but I think it was worthwhile. Your badges show the room number where you should go after the lunch break. Do go there in time so that we can start on time, because it's again streamed. We follow the digital. So the stream for workshop 1 will continue. For the others, you can switch using the links under the window for each screen. Right after the workshops, there will be a coffee break, and then we'll meet up here for a final panel, if you will, in which we hear all the reports from the workshops and collate them. And I think this will be quite an exciting round, looking at things from this perspective, what was said in the panels, in the keynotes, and so on, and collate everything and draw our conclusions. And last but not least, the workshops will be held in German. No translation for the workshops, I apologize, but we can catch the summary this afternoon when we hear the reports from the workshops. If you want to join the workshops digitally, if you find that you can't get in physically, we have Wi-Fi here, and you can then dial in from here. Enjoy your lunch and see you during the workshops.